Chapter 2459, Western Continent Shaken. The system announcement repeated throughout the Star Valley 3 times, and everyone in battle fell silent for a moment at the main god system's cold, mechanical voice. What's going on? Someone captured the Starlight Fortress? The Silver Lion Legion members couldn't keep up with the sudden developments. They hadn't even made it through the walls or gate yet, so no one should have been able to capture the fortress. How could this have happened? It wasn't just the Legion's various experts who were confused, even McCaffrey, the Legion's vice commander, was stunned. What happened to the Starlight Fortress? McCaffrey gazed at the fortress several thousand yards away, confounded. Did someone sneak in and slay the final Guardian boss? Even as McCaffrey wondered this, he tried to deny the possibility. In God's domain, players couldn't enter a sealed fortress until they destroyed the front gate or broke a hole in the walls. Since the Starlight Fortress's walls and gate were intact, how could any player get into the fortress? Even if players could accomplish the task, the fortress was still home to hundreds of thousands of elemental creatures. All of these monsters were level 110 or higher, and the weakest of them was Lord rank. Not even a 1,000-man, Tier 3 team would be able to handle the final Guardian boss in such a situation, much less a 100-man team of Tier 3 players. Even if players miraculously managed to reach and challenge the final Guardian boss, fighting the mythic ranked boss should cause a huge commotion, but although they had been engaged in battle outside the fortress, they hadn't heard any noise from within. The only strange part about this siege was that over 50,000 monsters had emerged to attack, rather than the 10,000 they had expected. Moreover, this monster army had over 100 Grand Lords and a mythic boss, a creature that normally should remain within the fortress. Could it be? McCaffrey suddenly thought of a possibility, and he spun toward Shi Feng, who was busy looting the Starlight Behemoth's loot near the rear line. In all of his experience sieging God's domain's fortresses, the final Guardian boss had never charged out of the fortress, yet the Starlight Behemoth had been extraordinarily powerful. As a mythic-ranked realm lord, the Starlight Behemoth could be considered on par with a world boss, albeit one of the weakest. Of course, a level 113 world boss was an absolute nightmare for current players. Not to mention, the Starlight Behemoth had the support of an army of 50,000 monsters. Defeating it was far more difficult than defeating an ordinary realm lord. If Shi Feng hadn't used Miniature World to suppress the Guardian boss's domain earlier, McCaffrey would have prepared to lose half of his legion at least. Meanwhile, Shi Feng stood in the middle of the crater, holding a dark gold token. The token radiated dense mana and served as proof of their success in capturing the Starlight Fortress. The Starlight Fortress Lord's token. McCaffrey wasn't the only one to notice. Crimson Witch and the others had turned to look at Shi Feng as well. They've captured the fortress, just like that? Crimson Witch stared at the token in Shi Feng's hand with wide eyes. Although she knew that Shi Feng's group had a high chance of capturing the Starlight Fortress, she had never thought he'd secure the Fortress Lord's token so soon. This was one of Star Valley's fortresses they were talking about. It was something the Western Continent's various superpowers dreamed of obtaining. And yet, Shi Feng had captured the fortress so easily. If she told this story, not even fools would believe her. Every member of the Silver Lion Legion was stupefied. None of them had ever expected a fortress in a level 100+ Forbidden Land to be so easy to capture. If the continent's other superpowers found out about this, they'd likely faint with anger. In reality, even Shi Feng was astonished. He hadn't expected to obtain the Starlight Fortress Lord's token so quickly either. He had even been prepared to use the Hero's Tome to summon a Tier 4 hero. If the first Guardian boss they had faced had already been a mythic-ranked realm lord, the final Guardian boss might be a superior mythic. Players like them wouldn't be able to deal with a level 110+ superior mythic easily. Only a Tier 4 hero would have a chance of defeating such a monster. This has saved us a lot of effort, but we have much less time to fortify the fortress now. Shi Feng was not particularly pleased to see the Fortress Lord's token, and he gave it a bitter smile. The fact that he had obtained the Fortress Lord's token so soon was both a blessing and a curse. Now that he had secured the Fortress Lord's token, he would have full control of the Starlight Fortress's magic array. Although he still had to reach the fortress's core to activate the defensive magic array, it would no longer buff the monsters within now that he had the token. This would make capturing the fortress far easier. Now, he only needed to clear out the monsters in the Starlight Fortress, and he wouldn't have to destroy the fortress's wall or gate to do it. He could simply waltz through the front gate. The only problem was that he needed to clear out the monsters and strengthen the fortress's defenses within 3 days, before the fortress opened to the public and players began to flood in. Without adequate defenses, managing the fortress would become troublesome, and the various superpowers might use the opportunity to take it from him. Unfortunately, sealing the fortress and preventing players from entering wasn't possible. The Starlight Fortress was in Star Valley, a forbidden land. God's domain's forbidden lands weren't controlled by any kingdom or empire, and almost all of their fortresses had survived since ancient times, created before the Great Destruction. Forbidden Lands fortresses weren't like those in neutral maps or guild towns and cities. Even with the Fortress Lord's token, one would not gain full access to the fortress. They couldn't open or seal the fortresses as they wished. This was also the reason that any power to capture a fortress in a forbidden land was forced to send a large number of members to garrison the fortress. In truth, the main god system's settings for this weren't unreasonable. Forbidden Lands had far more abundant resources than other maps. If a power could acquire full control of an ancient fortress in a forbidden land, it would be nigh impossible for other powers to break through the defenses and take it from them due to the defensive mechanisms that had also survived since ancient times. The power that had first captured the fortress would have permanent access to the Forbidden Lands resources, while everyone else would have to watch from the sidelines. This certainly wasn't a fair situation. Take the Starlight Fortress, for example. It might only be a small fortress, but once its defensive magic array was activated, only Tier 5 beings would be able to break it. In an era where the gods had gone into seclusion, Tier 5 powerhouses stood at the peak of God's domain. Even emperors had to show proper respect. These powerhouses could wipe out entire kingdoms. Not even empires would get away scot-free after provoking such an individual. Shi Feng had thought that he'd have 3 full days to bolster the Starlight Fortress's defenses after he captured it, but now he had to waste some of that time clearing out the hundreds of thousands of monsters within. While Shi Feng and the others continued their fight against the Starlight Fortress's monsters, the Stormheart adventurer team watched from a distance with dropped jaws. "Who are those people?" the ruthless, greatsword-wielding man muttered as he stared at the system announcement in shock. "They've actually managed to capture the Starlight Fortress? We don't know who they are, but this will certainly cause an uproar across the continent," Crow, Stormheart's commander, said. He couldn't help but glance Shi Feng's way. The various powers and expert teams all wanted to conquer Star Valley, but players couldn't remain in the area for very long, which slowed their exploration progress in the Forbidden Land. Although the various superpowers had frequently tried to capture fortresses within Star Valley, none had succeeded. Now that someone had, Crow didn't even want to imagine how this event would change Star Valley. While Stormheart's members discussed the matter amongst themselves, news of the Starlight Fortress's capture spread like wildfire throughout the western continent. Chapter 2460, Swarming Starlight Fortress Silvermoon Empire, Silver Lion City. What did you say? Zero Wing has already captured the Starlight Fortress? Adolf was momentarily stunned when he heard McCaffrey's report. Impossible. Your group only left a while ago. Even if you hadn't rested, how could you have slain several 100,000 monsters in the fortress so quickly? Adolf felt as if McCaffrey were playing a joke on him. Zero Wing and the Silver Lion Legion hadn't even been gone from Silver Lion City for more than a day, and the Starlight Fortress was home to hundreds of thousands of monsters, the weakest of which was Lord rank. Furthermore, there were plenty of great lords and grand lords in the fortress, and multiple mythic-ranked guardian bosses. Even if the Starlight Fortress had opened its gate to the Silver Lion Legion, the Legion's 8,000 players would still need a lot of time to clear out all of the monsters. It'd be a miracle if the Legion finished the job within 2 or 3 days. However, less than a day had passed since the Legion had left for Star Valley, and including travel time, they had spent even less time in the area. Did McCaffrey assume he had gone senile with old age? It's true, Great Elder, McCaffrey insisted, smiling bitterly when he saw Adolph's skepticism. Take a look for yourself if you don't believe me. We've already entered the Starlight Fortress and are clearing out the monsters. The fortress magic array is now buffing us, rather than its previous residents. As McCaffrey spoke, he changed the video chat to display his view of the situation. Adolph's display then revealed the Silver Lion Legion's fight with the elemental creatures within the Starlight Fortress. Although the weakest of the elemental creatures were level 110 lords, and many of them were level 110 plus Great Lords and Grand Lords, the fortress's magic array suppressed every one of the monsters, drastically reducing their basic attributes and mobility. In addition, the Legion's members were surrounded by a faint purple glow, significantly enhancing their attributes and physiques. Although the Silver Lion Legion was badly outnumbered, the elemental creatures were no match for them, and the monsters continued to fall as the fight continued. Seeing this made it obvious that the Starlight Fortress was now under player control. Otherwise, the fortress's magic array wouldn't behave in such a way. How is this possible? Adolph stared with wide eyes. They were talking about one of Star Valley's fortresses. Even if several superpowers worked together, they still couldn't capture a fortress in this level 100 plus forbidden land, much less Divine Tribe alone. Great Elder, I doubt it will be long before the other superpowers hear of this. The main god system had announced the Starlight Fortress's capture in a regional announcement. We couldn't keep this a secret if we wanted to, McCaffrey cautioned. He could sympathize with how Adolph felt at the moment. When Shi Feng had first declared that he wanted to capture the Starlight Fortress, McCaffrey had assumed the swordsman was both insane and ignorant. The West's various superpowers had to expend a lot of resources and manpower to obtain a single town, yet Shi Feng wanted to capture a fortress in a level 100 plus forbidden land. Clearly, he hadn't been taking the Western continent's superpowers seriously. Star Valley had leveling resources that were unique to the area. It was also home to the West's only 2 known God mode regional dungeons. It was no exaggeration to claim that owning one of Star Valley's fortresses was on par with owning several Grade 1 veins. If the various superpowers were capable of capturing these fortresses, they would have already done so. How could a pseudo-superpower like Zero Wing possibly succeed where the various superpowers had failed? In the end, however, Shi Feng had succeeded. Moreover, the strength Zero Wing had displayed was far beyond anything McCaffrey could have imagined. When it came to laying siege to fortified locations, Zero Wing outstripped ordinary superpowers. In fact, not even super guilds would prove as adept as Zero Wing in this respect. The domain tools and the Crimson Dragon flying ship Shi Feng had revealed were godly tools during an offensive siege. Watching those tools in action had changed everything McCaffrey had thought he knew about siege battles. Before the Ring of Gospel and flying ship, Tier 3 experts were nothing. It seems I still underestimated Zero Wing. Not only can it travel between the continents, but it has even proven capable of capturing the Starlight Fortress. Not even super guilds have such firm foundations, Adolph said, taking a deep breath to calm himself. He also reevaluated what he knew about the guild known as Zero Wing. Since that is the case, I want you to give everything you have in assisting Zero Wing from now on. Also, inform Black Flame that Divine Tribe is willing to go all out in helping his guild manage the Starlight Fortress. Not only will we send the Divine Him Legion and a 150,000-man expert army to garrison the fortress free of charge, but we'll also give Zero Wing 100 bottles of the special enchanted bloodline. In return, all Divine Tribe wants is a temporary residence in the Starlight Fortress. Adolph's declaration stunned McCaffrey. Do we really need to go that far, Great Elder? Setting aside the Divine Him Legion, we went to great lengths to save up 100 bottles of the special enchanted bloodline. If we give them all to Zero Wing, our guild's Tier 2 experts will have a much harder time reaching Tier 3 than other superpowers players. McCaffrey quickly tried to dissuade Adolph from his decision. The Divine Him Legion wasn't as strong as the Silver Lion Legion, but it was the guild's second strongest trump card legion. Normally, it was responsible for garrisoning the guild's important mining towns. If they transferred the Divine Him Legion to the Starlight Fortress, those mining towns' defenses would become a problem. The 100 special enchanted bloodlines were also supposed to be the capital divine tribe used to compete with the various super guilds. These bloodlines could help the guild quickly nurture Tier 3 experts. With another 100 Tier 3 experts, Divine Tribe could start raiding level 100 super large-scale team dungeons, instantly surpassing the various super guilds. Although Zero Wing had secured the Starlight Fortress, fortresses in Forbidden Lands weren't like those in other maps. Even after capturing them, players couldn't gain full control of these fortresses. Moreover, NPCs wouldn't be around to help manage the fortresses, and thus, they would require a large number of experts to protect them long-term. Otherwise, it wouldn't be long before the ruling power started having problems. Since news of the Starlight Fortress's capture had already begun to spread, many powers would swarm to it in the near future. Meanwhile, Zero Wing had barely any manpower on the Western continent. Without Divine Tribe's help, defending the Starlight Fortress was impossible for Zero Wing. There was simply no reason for Divine Tribe to give Zero Wing 100 bottles of the special enchanted bloodline. Emichim. We have to. You should realize that if we want a temporary residence in Star Valley, Zero Wing is our only option for an ally. On the other hand, Zero Wing can choose from many superpowers to ally with. However, small fortresses can only have one temporary residence, and we have to have it, no matter what. Adolf sternly informed his subordinate. The potential wealth and resources related to the Starlight Fortress couldn't be underestimated, especially the leveling resources. If Divine Tribe could secure a temporary residence in the Starlight Fortress, the guild's overall leveling speed would surpass the other superpowers by a large margin. 100 special enchanted bloodlines? Zero Wing really has lucked out. When Crimson Witch overheard Adolf's statement and tone, she knew the Great Elder had already made up his mind. She wasn't happy about it, but there was nothing she could do to change it. A lot of superpowers will be paying attention to the fortress, and it still isn't guaranteed that Zero Wing can defend its ownership. Hopefully, Zero Wing doesn't act foolishly. While Divine Tribe discussed the matter, the West's various superpowers began to grow restless. Interesting. It seems someone has proven capable of capturing the Starlight Fortress. Which power is it? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU, could it be a hidden superpower that has finally decided to spread its wings? Regardless, let's go take a look at the fortress. If this unknown power can't manage the fortress, this is the perfect opportunity to take it from them. The Western continent's various powers began to dispatch large expert teams, sending them to Star Valley. These teams only had one goal: take the Starlight Fortress. Chapter 2461, Fortress's Legacy. Star Valley, Starlight Fortress. Inside the dilapidated fortress full of level 110 plus elemental creatures, the Silver Lion Legion continued to push toward the fortress's core. Although they faced more Great Lords and Grand Lords as they delved further into the fortress, defeating these monsters became an easy task with the Tier 4 hero McCaffrey had summoned and the fortress's magic array buff. After grinding in the fortress for just 6 hours, every member of the Legion discovered that their experience bars had grown considerably. Their leveling speed here was several times faster than grinding in normal maps. Furthermore, the elemental creatures dropped substantial loot, including plenty of level 110 mysterious iron equipment. If they were lucky, even level 110 secret silver equipment and set equipment would drop. The equipment was top tier to the Silver Lion Legion's members. The highest leveled players among them were level 106, while many of them were still stuck at level 105. Currently, obtaining level 110 weapons and equipment was a major challenge for them. Set equipment pieces' attributes were generally half a rank better than ordinary equipment of the same rank. If players could collect the full set, the set's attributes would be a full rank better than ordinary equipment of the same rank, with some having even greater bonuses. Take the level 110 secret silver set equipment the Starlight Fortress's monsters dropped, for example. Although the hidden blue set was only a level 110 secret silver set equipment, not only would having 6 of the 8 pieces increase a player's casting speed by 20%, but it would also increase their spell's effects by 25%. With all 8 pieces of the set, it would increase one's spell completion rate by another 2% and casting range by 20%. Wearing this set, a magical class expert's DPS would be even higher than players in level 110 fine gold equipment. Even after they reached level 110, they couldn't be certain how many pieces of level 110 fine gold equipment they could obtain. It was likely that only the guild's peak experts had any chance of securing a full set. Obtaining enough level 110 fine gold equipment was simply too difficult for experts of their caliber. Fortunately, McCaffrey had already announced that he would auction all weapons and equipment they obtained from the Starlight Fortress. This meant that they'd all get a chance to acquire level 110 secret silver set equipment. How much they obtained would only depend on how many GCPs they had saved up. This was the reason that the Silver Lion Legion members put all of their effort into clearing out the Starlight Fortress's monsters, even without Shi Feng saying a word. They actually hoped that Shi Feng's group wouldn't participate in the battle, allowing them to keep all of the elemental creatures for themselves. The fortress only had so many monsters, and there wouldn't be enough secret silver set equipment for everyone. Guild leader, are we really going to leave these elemental creatures to Divine Tribes members? Aqua Rose asked as she watched the Silver Lion Legion push through the fortress's main streets. Level 110 secret silver equipment and set equipment might not be important to her or the other experts that had ventured to the western continent with Shi Feng, but it would be to Zero Wing's other experts. Moreover, not even level 110 common equipment had shown up on the market yet, much less level 110 secret silver equipment. They had an advantage with the Crimson Dragon flying ship, and the fortress's magic array currently suppressed the monster's basic attributes. This was an excellent opportunity to secure some level 110 weapons and equipment for the guild. Leaving all of the suppressed monsters for the Silver Lion Legion was a huge waste. That won't be necessary. Although these monsters drop a lot of loot, only the Grand Lords drop secret silver equipment, and they only have a chance of doing so. The drop rate isn't 100%. Since the Silver Lion Legion is willing to help us clear out the fortress, we should allow them to benefit from the task, Shi Feng said, chuckling when he watched the idea of level 110 secret silver equipment tempt Aqua Rose. If we try to clear the fortress ourselves, it'll take us a long time. Besides, we have something more important to take care of. As per Shi Feng's agreement with Adolf, the Silver Lion Legion was only here to help Zero Wing capture a city. Now that they had captured the Starlight Fortress, the Legion had no reason to continue the fight. It was well within its rights to turn around and leave. The fact that the Silver Lion Legion was willing to slay the monsters within the fortress was good news for Shi Feng. If Zero Wing had to clear out the monsters on its own, he wouldn't have much time left to fortify the fortress. Something more important? After giving the matter some thought, Aqua Rose asked, "Are we raiding the remaining Guardian bosses?" The moment Aqua Rose mentioned the Guardian bosses, Cola and the other Zero Wing experts burst with excitement. They hadn't had a chance to participate in the fight with the Starlight Behemoth directly, so they were itching for action. "No," Shi Feng replied, shaking his head. "We'll be taking control of the Fortress Lord's Mansion." The Fortress Lord's Mansion? Guild leader, don't you already have the Fortress Lord's token? Aqua Rose inquired. The Fortress Lord's token was necessary to take control of the fortress as a whole, and it was the key component in taking over the Fortress Lord's Mansion. Normally, when one obtained a Fortress Lord's token, they automatically gained control of the Fortress Lord's Mansion. However, Shi Feng now informed them that they still needed to secure the mansion. "I do have the Fortress Lord's token, but I don't control the Fortress Lord's Mansion yet. In fact, I don't even have partial control over it," Shi Feng explained with a bitter smile. Fortresses built before the Great Destruction weren't like more modern fortresses. When one gained the Fortress Lord's token for the latter, they would gain full control of the Fortress Lord's Mansion, but that wasn't the case with ancient fortresses. Securing an ancient Fortress Lord's Mansion would prove several times more difficult than capturing the fortress itself. The true value of these fortresses didn't lie in the resident monsters' loot nor the items that the Guardian bosses dropped. Rather, the truly valuable items were the ancient legacies, that were stored in the Fortress Lord's Mansion. Items such as weapons and equipment were only secondary compared to these ancient legacies. Most of the legacies ancient humans had left behind to reach Tier 3 had been lost to time, and as a result, present-day humans had a far more difficult time completing their Tier 3 and higher promotion quests. Since ancient fortresses like the Starlight Fortress had existed before the Great Destruction, they, more or less, still contain Tier 3 and higher legacies. These legacies were the true treasures within ancient fortresses. At this stage of the game, players only knew that it was difficult to reach Tier 3. They weren't aware that Tier 3 was only the beginning of their journey in God's domain. Once they completed their Tier 3 promotions, growing stronger would become many times more difficult. Why was this the case? The reason was very simple. After reaching Tier 3, players wouldn't receive any guidance from the system regarding ways to increase their strength. Take Tier 3 skills and spells, for example. These were the foundation for Tier 3 players' power. If players only relied on legacy skill points to acquire Tier 3 skills and spells, they wouldn't be considered a true Tier 3 player. To be a true Tier 3 player, one would need at least 10 Tier 3 skills or spells in their arsenal. One also needed a way to control their mana body, which was also a crucial legacy. These methods were even more important than Tier 3 skills and spells. Although Shi Feng was already a master magician, and his control and understanding of magic arrays were far superior to other players, he only had basic control of his mana body. This was also the case for the Western Continent's experts, who were particularly skilled at controlling mana. Their mastery with their mana bodies was still in the infantile stages. This was why current Tier 3 experts were no match for Tier 3 NPCs. Many of the legacies within ancient fortresses were related to mana body control, offering methods that allowed humans, who had no physical advantages, to survive in the dangerous environments that had survived the Great Destruction. Guild leader, how are we supposed to secure the Fortress Lord's mansion? Aqua Rose asked. She realized that Shi Feng wasn't joking when she saw his serious expression. If they could not secure the Fortress Lord's mansion, the Starlight Fortress would remain ownerless. If that didn't change before the fortress automatically opened to the public, Zero Wing would be left in a very awkward position. It's simple. All we need to do is pass the legacy trial in the Fortress Lord's mansion. If we fail, we'll only control the fortress on the surface, even with the Fortress Lord's token, Shi Feng replied. To put it simply, the Starlight Fortress Lord's token was a ticket to obtain the Starlight Fortress's legacy. How much of the fortress players controlled would depend on how much of its legacy they could activate. The various ancient fortresses' legacy trials differed in difficulty. The known difficulties were normal, hard, hell, Azura, and God mode. The more challenging a legacy trial was, the greater its rewards would be, but clearing the trial would also require more players. Moreover, all legacy trials had a 1-week cooldown. Shi Feng then led Aqua Rose and the rest of his companions toward the Starlight Fortress's Fortress Lord's mansion. A magic array currently enveloped the mansion, and not even mythic monsters could break through the barrier, let alone players. Only the player that held the Fortress Lord's token and those that player granted access to could pass through the barrier. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. After walking up to the mansion's entrance, Shi Feng retrieved the Fortress Lord's token and started to chant an incantation. Silently, he prayed, "Please, don't let the Starlight Fortress's legacy trial be too high of a difficulty." He hadn't just chosen to capture the Starlight Fortress because its monsters were easier to deal with. Most of his reasoning was based on the fact that it was one of the few small fortresses in Star Valley that had a Fortress Lord's mansion with a weak mana signature. This meant that the legacy the Starlight Fortress protected wasn't particularly powerful, and the legacy trial shouldn't be overly difficult. If he had tried to capture a fortress with a powerful Fortress Lord's mansion, he would have wasted his effort if he couldn't secure control of the mansion after capturing the fortress. When Shi Feng finished the incantation recorded on the token, a dark purple, fourfold magic array appeared on the mansion's main door. A set of gigantic, golden doors then emerged, and as the doors slowly parted, an ancient aura gushed between them. Crap! Isn't this just a measly small fortress? Why does it have an Azura mode legacy trial? Shi Feng was utterly dumbfounded when he saw the golden doors. Chapter 2462, Gold Gate. Aqua rose and the others couldn't help their surprise when the set of golden doors appeared before the entrance to the Fortress Lord's mansion. Although the doors were only 8 meters tall, they radiated a sacred aura that tamed the nearby ambient mana. This aura even affected the mana within Zero Wings members. Although the divine runes and images had been engraved on the doors, these runes and images were indiscernible when players tried to examine them. Even so, the blurred runes and images felt somehow heavy and inspired curiosity. What are the markings on the doors? I tried to examine them for a moment, but it made me feel even more exhausted than using advanced combat techniques multiple times in a row. Aqua Rose wondered aloud. After examining the engravings, she pried her gaze away from the doors. She had seen plenty of amazing items in God's domain, but this was the first time she had encountered something that could deplete her concentration so drastically after looking at it for a few seconds. She didn't doubt that if she had stared at the doors for a few more moments, her mind would have been overloaded. Fire Dance and the others also turned away from the doors, afraid they'd pass out if they continued to stare. God's Domain's players rarely fainted from concentration depletion, but if it happened, the results would be even more severe than from stamina depletion. When a player's stamina depleted, they'd lose the ability to move, but when they lost all of their concentration, they'd be forced into a deep slumber, which took an incredibly long time to recover from. This could be a fatal setback for players fighting on the front lines. This is normal. The information on this Gold Gate is a legacy that has been passed down from ancient times. Moreover, this is a relatively complete legacy and far more complex than the combat techniques we've seen thus far. It isn't something players can simply glance at, Shi Feng said. When he saw his teammates' curiosity, he revealed a bitter smile and continued, "If you look at this legacy for too long, your recovery could take more than 5 days." The legacy gates left behind in ancient fortresses fell into 3 ranks: Bronze Gate, Silver Gate, and Gold Gate. Each gate was stronger than the last, and the legacies they contained were more complete with each subsequent rank. Similarly, the higher the gate's rank was, the more difficult the legacy trial would be. Many Tier 3 experts would already struggle to clear the normal and hard mode legacy trials on the Bronze Gates. The Gold Gates only contained Azura and God mode legacy trials, which were so difficult that even peak experts would despair at the challenge. Shi Feng had assumed that, even in the worst-case scenario, the Starlight Fortress would house a Silver Gate. He had never considered that the Legacy Gate would be Gold rank. Taking control of this Fortress Lord's mansion would be nearly as difficult as capturing a large fortress's Fortress Lord's mansion. Has the system elevated the trial's difficulty because we're the first to capture an ancient fortress? Questions filled Shi Feng's mind as he gazed at the Gold Gate before him. Normally, small fortresses had, at most, silver gates, and medium fortresses would only have a small chance of containing a Gold Gate. He had never heard of anyone finding a Gold Gate in a small fortress. Forget it. Let's just take this one step at a time. Shi Feng shook his head, banishing his worries. He then gritted his teeth and led his team through the Gold Gate. If he refused to participate in the trial now that he had activated it with the Fortress Lord's token, he would have to wait for the token's cooldown to end before he could try again. Moreover, the appearance of a Gold Gate wasn't all bad. This could be a blessing for them. A high-ranked Legacy Gate might be very difficult to clear, but it would also provide greater help as players learned how to control their mana bodies. A Legacy Gate was an ancient fortress's most valuable treasure. It was also the greatest benefit to controlling an ancient fortress. The various powers hadn't initially been aware of this fact in Shi Feng's previous life and had treated the Legacy Gates as a way to gain more control over their fortresses. The various powers had only discovered the Legacy Gates' true value after some time, learning that these gates were the fastest way for players to unlock the full potential of their mana bodies. If players tried to explore and adapt to their mana bodies without such help, unlocking their mana bodies' potential would take ages. As Shi Feng and the others walked through the Gold Gate, the world around them warped. The world settled into place again, and Shi Feng found himself before a sacred, golden mountain, alone. This golden mountain was several thousand meters tall. Shi Feng couldn't even see where the mountain ended. The mountain's aura was just slightly less intense than that of the Tower of Four Gods. While bathed in the mountain's aura, Shi Feng felt an intense pressure bear down on him, reducing his mobility. So, this is a Gold Gates trial? Shi Feng looked around him, shocked. During his previous life, he had only ever entered a Bronze Gate, and he had only acquired the entry slot after paying a huge sum. Even so, he had paid the price gladly. If he hadn't, he would have had to rely on his own experiences to explore and adapt to his mana body, like independent players, wasting a lot of precious time in the process. The stronger one's mana body was, the more difficult it was to unlock its potential. Because of this, independent Tier 3 players struggled to surpass the various superpowers Tier 3 experts. Unfortunately, it couldn't be helped. It was simply a benefit of having access to a guild's resources. If that weren't the case, so many players wouldn't be so desperate to join the various superpowers. Within the Gold Gate, Shi Feng discovered that the difference between a Bronze and Gold Gate was far greater than he had expected. When he had entered the Bronze Gate, its environment hadn't affected his mental state, but within the Gold Gate, he could feel a void in his mind. Within spaces that had thin traces of mana, such a mental state would be extremely helpful. While players operated in spaces that lacked mana, the harsh environments would affect their ability to learn and grow, even with the support of their mana bodies. While Shi Feng and the others quietly observed their surroundings, the phantom of a goddess in dark blue armor appeared before them all. I am this Legacy Gate's creator, Iliadi. Trial taker, you have 2 days to climb the sacred mountain and pass the trial. If you fail, you will be removed from this place. Only if 3 or more of you reach the sacred mountain's first shrine, will you obtain the Starlight Fortress's bronze mark, securing your hold over the fortress. Remember, this is your only opportunity. You will not be allowed to reach this place again for another month, Iliadi explained, watching Shi Feng carefully. The moment Iliadi finished speaking, she vanished as if she had never existed. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Fortunately, we have 2 days. Shi Feng breathed out a sigh of relief after listening to the trial's introduction. He had only been given 1 day to ascend the sacred mountain when he had challenged the Bronze Gate in the past, but now, he would have 2 days to complete the trial. Fortunately, this amount of time should be more than enough for Aqua Rose and his other companions to adapt to this environment. This was, after all, the first time they had entered a legacy trial. Before Shi Feng could celebrate his good luck, however, 3 knights in exquisite armor appeared on the sacred mountain. Each of the knights carried swords, and the weakest among them was level 110 and tier 3. The moment these knights manifested, they charged toward Shi Feng. The knights were quick, and despite the lack of mana in the area, dense mana surrounded each of them. 3 knights with fully unlocked mana bodies, right off the bat. Shi Feng was stunned as he watched the approaching knights. Chapter 2463, Basic Unlock. Sensing the intense amount of mana that coated the NPC knight swords, Shi Feng wasn't willing to take unnecessary risks. He immediately unsheathed both of his swords and prepared for battle. He might not have been as worried if his opponents had merely been new Tier 3 NPCs or Tier 3 NPCs below level 100, but against 3 level 110, Tier 3 NPCs with fully unlocked mana bodies, he'd lose his life with the slightest mistake. The difference between a locked mana body and one that has been unlocked was like the difference between a refinement realm expert and an ordinary player. This was why some Tier 3 NPCs could serve as magistrates in the various kingdoms and empires, while others could only serve as a town or city's guard captain. Some weaker Tier 3 NPCs were even limited to guarding a palace's entrance. These different statuses were a result of the state of the NPC's mana bodies. Any Tier 3 NPC that could unlock their mana body's full potential would be an elite among those of the same tier. They were no longer ordinary NPCs, but experts. These Tier 3 NPCs could beat expert players to a pulp as easily as ordinary players. Reaching their target, the 3 NPC knights slashed their swords at Shi Feng from different directions. The knights were perfectly in sync as if they had been comrades in battle for over a dozen years. 2 of the knights attempted to distract Shi Feng, while one attacked his blind spot. Furthermore, their attacks were powerful enough to throw great lords of the same level. If any other Tier 3 player stood in Shi Feng's place, it wouldn't be long before they were defeated. Unfortunately, the three knights couldn't fool Shi Feng. As a domain realm expert, he quickly determined their attack trajectories. Shi Feng instantly countered the knight attacking his blind spot, forcibly altering the knight's attack trajectory and guiding the weapon to collide with the other two knights' swords. Pung! 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 The three knights stumbled back as a result of the collision, but Shi Feng didn't get off scot-free. He also stumbled half a step back, and his right arm trembled slightly from the impact. So, this is a Golden Gates trial? Shi Feng glanced down at Killing Ray, which vibrated with a low hum, astonished. He couldn't help but worry for Aqua Rose and the others. There was almost no mana in this world, and because of that, Aqua Rose and his other companions would be lucky if they could exhibit half of their normal combat power, even with the help of their mana bodies. Shi Feng's first clash with the three knights had been brief, but he could tell that his opponent's combat standards were on par with the Trial Tower's 5th floor. Their combat standards might not be very high, but he was sure they had silver-ranked mana bodies. Otherwise, there was no way a single clash would cause his arm to go numb with his basic attributes. If even he struggled, it was easy to imagine how the others might fare. Moreover, he was only at the foot of the mountain. He hadn't even started to climb it yet. Ascending the mountain was the goal of this legacy trial, and as players climbed higher, they'd face stronger opponents. Fortunately, they weren't actually required to kill their opponents. As long as players survived against the mountain's residents for 30 minutes, they'd be allowed to pass, but that was still a challenging task. PvP fights rarely lasted more than 10 minutes, not to mention fights against NPCs, since such high-intensity battles required a lot of stamina and concentration. However, during his first clash with the knights, Shi Feng sensed the NPCs' mana circuits and how they used the mana within them. Normally, sensing such things in the outside world was quite difficult due to the abundant mana in the area, but the Legacy Gate space had barely any. As a result, the flow of mana within the NPC knights was easily noticeable. Shi Feng wasn't a magical class player, but he could clearly sense their mana flow. Only, because these knights only possessed silver mana bodies, their mana body's construction was far simpler than Shi Feng's epic ranked mana body. He wouldn't gain much insight from watching these knights fight. Even so, he'd gain more information than he had from unlocking his past bronze mana body. After Shi Feng had shoved the three knights back, they quickly regained their postures and launched another attack, giving Shi Feng no time to catch a break. This time, however, the knights opted for a different approach. One of the knights focused on attacking Shi Feng, while the other two consolidated their mana and waited for an opening. The knights now knew that they were no match for Shi Feng's techniques, and they had decided to overwhelm him with brute force. It left Shi Feng in a difficult position. His basic attributes were definitely higher than the Tier 3 knights, but with their mana empowering their swords, Shi Feng couldn't block the weapons without repercussions. He had no choice but to dodge and retreat. Fortunately, the mana only increased the force behind the knights' attacks, it did not increase their damage. 10 minutes. 15 minutes. 20 minutes. As the battle progressed, Shi Feng's excitement grew. He had learned and mimicked the method the knights used to conduct and use the mana within their mana bodies. It was like learning to draw a new magic array. The knights charged at him again, and Shi Feng silently guided the mana in his body outward, enveloping his sacred sword. This should be enough. He then swung Killing Ray at the Tier 3 knights' mana-coated swords. Boom! The sound of an explosion echoed from the foot of the mountain. The impact from the blow shoved the three Tier 3 knights stumbling back a step. In contrast, Shi Feng remained steady in his original position, and his arm no longer shook. Suddenly, the sound of a system notification reached Shi Feng's ears. System, you have unlocked 5% of your epic mana body. I've finally grasped the method to unlock my mana body. Shi Feng was ecstatic as he glanced down at his weapon. He had finally learned to mimic the way these knights conducted and used their mana. Of course, he could not mimic the knights' methods perfectly, since they weren't compatible with his mana body. He needed to modify his approach. Moreover, he possessed an epic mana body, which had a more complex structure than a silver mana body. This was why he had only unlocked 5% of his mana body with that attack. It's no wonder why so many experts fought to enter gold gates in the past. I've made more than a fortnight's progress in less than half an hour. Seeing the 3 NPCs eye him hostilely, Shi Feng realized how astoundingly effective it was to train within a gold gate's legacy trial. If an expert with a silver mana body stood in his place, they would have likely unlocked all of their mana body with one trip. These knights had offered a perfect example of how to do so, after all, and this environment was the perfect place to observe others' mana bodies. This simply wasn't possible in the outside world. Following which, Shi Feng challenged the next group of NPC knights. He wanted to familiarize himself and adapt to the new sensation as quickly as possible. The second group consisted of 6 NPC knights, and they used a completely different method to employ their mana bodies. Individually, they were about as strong as the first 3 knights, but in the end, they were nothing more than lab rats for Shi Feng as he further optimized his epic mana body. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Not only did Shi Feng encounter more knights as he climbed the mountain, but the knights also had higher ranked mana bodies. The first knights only had basic silver mana bodies, but eventually, Shi Feng faced NPCs with intermediate silver and advanced silver mana bodies. As a result, Shi Feng was able to continue refining his epic mana body. 10%. 15%. 20%. After more than 7 hours of combat and completing his challenge against 6 Tier 3 knights with peak silver mana bodies, Shi Feng finally reached the Sacred Mountain's first shrine. After Shi Feng entered the first shrine, Iliadi, the goddess in dark blue armor, appeared before him again. Iliadi radiated an aura that was even beyond that of Tier 5 beings. Trial Taker, you have proven to be quite skilled. You have reached the first shrine within 9 hours. As a reward for your effort, I will present you with 2 options. The first option consists of surviving 3 moves against me. Not only will you clear this trial and enter the mountain's 2nd level by succeeding, but you'll also receive 1 legacy guidance. If you choose the second option, you will have to face this shrine's guardian. If you win, you will gain access to the 2nd level, but you will not receive additional rewards, Iliadi offered Shi Feng. You have 3 minutes to consider. Decide carefully. Chapter 2464, 3 Divine Swords. Once Iliadi finished speaking, she closed her eyes and waited for Shi Feng's reply in silence. She showed no intention of speaking further. Players actually have a chance to earn a legacy guidance in a gold gate? The goddess's explanation had stunned Shi Feng. Based on what he knew from the past, the legacy gate's creators were lofty beings. They'd only appear before players at the beginning of the legacy trial to explain the rules. Players shouldn't encounter them again after that. Shi Feng had never expected that not only would Iliadi appear before him near the Sacred Mountain's first shrine, but she'd also offer him 2 choices. Moreover, one of the 2 options would afford him the chance to obtain a legacy guidance. If the experts from his previous life found out about this, they'd try to kill him out of jealousy. Players didn't receive any guidance after reaching Tier 3 in God's domain. They'd have to rely on their own abilities to grow stronger, especially when trying to unlock their mana bodies. Even within the legacy trials, players could only rely on their observations to learn and improve. They wouldn't be given anything on a silver platter. Thus, receiving a legacy guidance was every expert player's dream. Unlocking a mana body's full potential was only a basic condition to activating a Tier 3 mana body. If players could unlock more of their mana body's potential, it could offer even greater benefits. However, unlocking more of a mana body's full potential was insanely difficult. If players had taken the wrong path during their early days, they'd have almost no chance of surpassing 100% potential. Players would have to settle for the most basic level of mana body. If all players were offered a chance to receive guidance from an ancient legacies, far more of the past's peak experts would have been able to reach Tier 5. The stronger a player's mana body was, the easier it'd be to complete their future promotion quests. This was why some experts with silver mana bodies had reached Tier 5, while some experts with gold mana bodies had been stuck at Tier 4. When Eliade had presented Shi Feng with two options, he had felt as if he were dreaming. "Lady Eliade, I choose your challenge." Shi Feng instantly decided. Challenging Eliade was undoubtedly reckless, but if he missed this opportunity, he'd regret it for the rest of his life. Even if he couldn't take control of the Starlight Fortress's Fortress Lord's mansion now, he could try again after the token's cooldown. However, if he passed up this opportunity to challenge Eliade, he might not get another chance to earn a legacy guidance. He had an epic mana body, and unlocking its potential would be far more difficult than with a gold mana body. Just trying to unlock 100% of its potential was an immensely difficult challenge, not to mention unlocking more than that. Excellent. You have made a wise decision. You will not receive another chance to challenge me, let alone obtain a legacy guidance, no matter how many times you come here, Eliade said as she opened her eyes. When she looked at Shi Feng, a hint of recognition flashed in her eyes. However, don't think that you can withstand 3 of my attacks. Even if I limit my strength to Tier 3, you have less than a 10% chance of completing my challenge with your sealed epic mana body. Eliade then pulled a blue greatsword, whose tip had been buried in the ground before her, and raised it above her head. A frightening amount of mana suddenly surrounded her, and a mana storm manifested around Eliade's greatsword. The storm was so powerful that it could even tear apart space. Shi Feng could sense that the phenomena weren't due to a skill or spell. Eliade was merely executing a normal attack. "Now, face me. First sword, light shadow." As she spoke those words, Eliade swung her greatsword down at Shi Feng, who stood over 40 yards away. A gigantic blade of mana appeared in the goddess's hands and descended on Shi Feng, splitting apart space as it passed. So, this is the true method of utilizing a mana body? Shi Feng was dumbfounded as the blade grew near. He had met many Tier 5 NPCs, but he had never met one that had such mastery over their mana body. Although Eliade had suppressed her strength to Tier 3, her normal attacks still had the power of a Tier 4 skill. Without hesitation, Shi Feng activated Heavenly Dragon's power. The legacy trial was located in a different realm. Although players were prohibited from using invulnerability skills, they could use any other skills or spells they possessed. This was why Shi Feng dared to accept Eliade's challenge. Divine runes immediately appeared around Shi Feng's body, substantially increasing his strength. He then brandished his swords at the descending mana weapon. Secret technique, lightning flash. Boom! When the weapons collided, the impact created a powerful shockwave that shook the surrounding area. Even the ground trembled at its might. The boom of the collision echoed across the entire sacred mountain. A figure then shot out of the dust cloud that encompassed the battlefield. It was none other than Shi Feng. Not only had he lost 1/5 of his HP, but he also failed to stabilize his footing after he landed, tumbling to the ground. Before Shi Feng could return to his feet, however, the goddess was already poised to attack again. This time, however, she positioned her sword beside her, prepared to execute a horizontal slash. Second sword, Holy Devour. Another mana storm brewed around her, threatening to devour everything in its path. This time, Shi Feng could feel the storm suck away the mana within him, and the pressure that bore down on him made it somewhat difficult to move. Shi Feng had no time to respond properly before the Eliade swung her greatsword. A torrent of fire manifested before Shi Feng, destabilizing space around it. These flames raged as if they needed to devour everything they touched, including space. These flames were more than twice as powerful as the earlier mana sword. Are you kidding me? Shi Feng's shock reached unprecedented levels as he watched the torrent of fire blast toward him. Normally, not even heroes could exhibit basic Tier 4 power with normal Tier 3 attacks, but not only did the goddess's horizontal swing contain Tier 4 power, but it was also at the intermediate rank. No one would believe him if he retold this tale. Despite his surprise, however, Shi Feng didn't hesitate. Realizing that he couldn't afford to hold back, Shi Feng activated Blade Liberation and executed Lightning Flash once more. Boom! Space exploded the moment the two fighters' weapons met. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Like before, Iliad's attack sent Shi Feng flying, and this time, it left him with less than 50% of his HP. However, before Shi Feng could stand up, he heard Iliad's voice. Third sword, Holy Annihilation. Iliad showed no intention of slowing her assault. Leaping into the air, she rose above Shi Feng and swung her greatsword downward. This time, the goddess's attack didn't include any mana fluctuations, but Shi Feng discovered that he couldn't move. He felt as if he were surrounded by enemies, and he could only watch as Iliad's greatsword descended toward him. This attack was many times stronger than her second swing. Power of Destruction, activate. Chapter 2465, Silver Mark. Along with Shi Feng's low shout, disintegration power started flowing out of the disintegration armor and set the surrounding space aquiver. At the same time, a portion of the disintegration power entered Shi Feng's body, instantly elevating him to the Tier 4 realm. Suddenly, the spatial restrictions and frightening pressure that originally bound Shi Feng's body weakened considerably, allowing him to move again. However, despite these changes, he did not feel safe. On the contrary, his complexion turned even grimmer than before. Previously, when he was still at Tier 3, he had felt that Iliad's current attack did not carry as much mana as her second attack. However, after reaching Tier 4, he realized just how wrong he was. Currently, the space within 50 yards of Iliad was actually filled with mana as dense as steel. In God's domain, mana's existence was akin to air. It would condense into a misty state only after reaching a sufficiently high density. However, the mana surrounding Iliad had surpassed the misty and liquid states. Normally, in God's domain, the more refined the mana was, the greater the energy it would contain. Take mana that was in a gaseous state and mana that had concentrated into magic crystals. The amounts of energy each contained were worlds apart. Seeing Iliad's frightening attack descending toward him, Shi Feng pushed his five senses to their very limits and executed his strongest skill, Void Slash, inwardly praying, "You must block it." In the next moment, 6 sword lights appeared from the void, then merged into one to meet Iliad's greatsword. Combined with the effects of all of Shi Feng's berserk skills, this attack could be said to be the peak of Shi Feng's current capabilities. In fact, he had even executed Void Slash at a 100% completion rate. The power of this attack could undoubtedly send mythic monsters of the same level flying. Most likely, even Tier 4 NPCs would be no exception. Boom! A deafening boom echoed throughout the surroundings after the attacks of both sides collided. The entire sacred mountain had even started trembling slightly. In the next moment, a figure flew out of the sacred mountain's first shrine and landed right at the foot of the sacred mountain, creating a crater that was over 3 meters deep. What a pity! I have waited a long time for a challenger with an epic mana body to show up. If only he had unlocked his mana body before coming here. Combined with the power of a Tier 4 existence, he might have been able to withstand my final move, Iliad said to herself, sighing when she saw Shi Feng disappearing from the shrine. However, just as she was about to leave, she suddenly sensed something. Her figure then disappeared from the shrine and reappeared at the mountain's foot. To be precise, she appeared beside the crater of Shi Feng's crash. He didn't die. Surprise flashed in Iliad's eyes for the first time when she saw Shi Feng getting to his feet in the crater. Despite the swordsman receiving her attack, his HP had not decreased by even a single point. Only, visible spatial cracks surrounded him. However, these cracks were mending themselves, and eventually, a perfect barrier formed around him. How close! If I didn't have the Nightwalker's cape's void shield, that attack definitely would have killed me. Shi Feng breathed out a sigh of relief as he looked at the barrier protecting him. He had still underestimated Iliad's final attack. That final attack was even stronger than those of the Crimson Dragon flying ship's mana pulse cannons, practically rivaling the flying ship's magic elven cannons already. He had never heard of anyone exhibiting power at the peak of Tier 4 with merely a normal Tier 3 attack. Fortunately, he had more than one fragmented legendary item on him, one of which was even for defense. Otherwise, only death awaited him in this trial. After inwardly celebrating for a moment, Shi Feng climbed out of the crater quickly and walked up to Eliade. "Lady Eliade, may I know if I passed your trial?" Shi Feng asked as he looked at the goddess. Although he survived, he had been sent flying all the way down the sacred mountain. Since his agreement with Eliade was for him to receive 3 of her moves, he wasn't sure if getting sent flying out of the shrine was already grounds for disqualification. Eliade had not stated the conditions for qualifications clearly. "You passed," Eliade said, nodding. "Moreover, your performance was excellent. You actually managed to receive 3 of my moves without having unlocked your Tier 3 mana body. Of all the challengers I have come across throughout the years, you are the first to accomplish such a feat. As a reward, I will grant you not only a legacy guidance but also the Starlight Fortress's silver mark." After saying so, Eliade drew a silver rune in the air and imprinted it on the Fortress Lord's token tied around Shi Feng's wrist. "System, congratulations. You have obtained the silver mark and become the Starlight Fortress's Silver Lord. You may freely enter the Fortress Lord's mansion and make use of the Starlight Fortress's advanced functions. System, you have completed the challenge of the Legacy Gate's creator. Rewarding level +1 and 1 legacy guidance from Eliade." Upon receiving the series of system notifications, Shi Feng fell into a daze. He never thought that the rewards for this challenge would be so generous. Just the opportunity to receive a legacy guidance was already as valuable as a fragmented legendary item. In fact, if the peak experts of his previous life had known about this, they might have even willingly exchanged a fragmented legendary item just to receive a legacy guidance. After all, in God's domain, one's own strength had the utmost priority. External items such as weapons and equipment only served to bolster a person's existing strength. Moreover, so long as one was sufficiently strong, obtaining fragmented legendary items was not that difficult a task. Take the independent experts of adventurer teams, for example. Despite these experts not having any major corporations or superpowers backing them, some of them had still reached the apex of God's domain. Meanwhile, these people had accomplished this feat by relying entirely on their own strength. However, aside from receiving a legacy guidance, he had actually received the Starlight Fortress's silver mark as well. If the various superpowers in his previous life were to find out about this, they would definitely want to eat him alive. In the past, in order to increase their authority in the ancient fortresses they controlled, the various superpowers had invested countless manpower and resources into nurturing their peak experts. However, extremely few superpowers had managed to obtain an ancient fortress's silver mark, especially for ancient fortresses that housed a gold gate. This was because the silver mark was no longer something just a handful of peak experts could attain. Obtaining a silver mark from a legacy gate required 10 experts to clear the Sacred Mountain's second shrine and 3 experts to reach the Sacred Mountain's peak within one challenge attempt. Moreover, the difficulty of a Sacred Mountain's second level was far greater than that of the first level. The Sacred Mountain's first level served as a foundational level for the legacy trial. It functioned more as an educational tool than a challenge. However, it was a different story once players reached the Sacred Mountain's second level. The second level and beyond would differentiate the strong from the weak. They were not meant to teach players anything, and all that players could do on these levels was figure out a way to survive. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. In the case of the second level of a Bronze Gate's Sacred Mountain, Tier 3 players would face Tier 3 heroic spirits that possessed extremely high combat standards. The weakest among them could rival half-step refinement realm experts. Even worse, players had to go up against multiple heroic spirits simultaneously. As for the third level, rumor had it that the opponents were bona fide Tier 3 heroes. Of course, players were no longer required to survive for as long as 30 minutes on the second level and beyond. Nevertheless, they still needed to last 10 minutes. If even the Bronze Gates trial was already so arduous, Shi Feng did not even dare imagine what kind of opponents awaited him on the second level of the Gold Gates trial. Alright, you have a choice to make. Do you wish to receive guidance on how to unlock your epic mana body, or do you wish to receive guidance on mana techniques? Eliade asked as she looked at Shi Feng's stunned expression. Chapter 2466, Heavenly Blue Successor. There's also the option to learn mana techniques? Shi Feng could not help but hesitate when he heard the options Eliade gave him. Mana technique was a familiar term, a mana usage technique that players could use only after reaching Tier 3 and obtaining their mana body. It was categorized as a type of combat technique in God's domain. Only, combat techniques focused on the usage of a person's physical body for combat, while mana techniques focused on the usage of a person's mana for the same. However, only an extremely small number of players had the opportunity to learn mana techniques in God's domain because the knowledge had long been lost. Normally, players had to rely on their own inspiration to create mana techniques. As for Shi Feng, even after playing God's domain for a decade during his previous life, he never managed to learn a single mana technique. If it were before he had witnessed Eliade's 3 attacks, he would have most likely chosen to receive guidance on how to unlock his epic mana body without any hesitation. This was because the mana techniques he had seen experts use in his previous life hadn't been particularly powerful. Those mana techniques only bolstered the strength of existing skills and spells slightly, not even as useful as combat techniques. However, from the goddess's attacks, it would seem that he had been under a misconception. After all, Eliade's mana techniques allowed her to exhibit strength at the peak of Tier 4 despite having suppressed herself to Tier 3. The strength of her mana techniques was many times superior to bronze combat techniques. Of course, part of the reason why she could exhibit such strength with her mana technique was her high comprehension of the technique. Even so, this had still allowed Shi Feng to get a general idea of the power of mana techniques. If he could master Eliade's third sword, Holy Annihilation, then he really would be able to move unhindered through the entire God's domain. Normally, players had to rely on legendary items to transcend tiers. Moreover, the higher one's tier was, the more difficult it would be to transcend tiers. Just the gap between Tier 3 and Tier 4 was already massive. Even with a legendary item, the best a Tier 3 player could do when fighting a Tier 4 player of equal combat standards would be a draw. It would take more than just a legendary item to win against a bona fide Tier 4 player. Eliade's mana techniques, on the other hand, only needed one to unlock their mana body to transcend tiers. Meanwhile, given sufficient time, players could unlock even epic mana bodies to 100% potential. You have 30 seconds to consider. If you don't make a decision, I will take it as you giving up the opportunity to learn. You have only this one chance, so I hope you consider your decision well, Eliade said as she looked at Shi Feng. As soon as Eliade finished speaking, a system timer appeared before him, the timer counting down the seconds. 30 seconds. 25 seconds. 20 seconds. The ticking sounds were like a countdown to death, and they stimulated Shi Feng's mind. He had only this one opportunity to learn a mana technique. After he mastered it, he could even teach it to others. This mana technique would be a great help for Zero Wing's future. However, if he wished to unlock his epic mana body past 100% potential, he could only rely on Eliade's guidance. Otherwise, on his own, the chances of him breaking through the 100% threshold were practically zero. You have 10 more seconds to consider, Eliade reminded when she saw Shi Feng still in deep thought. However, Eliade's reminder did not catch Shi Feng's attention. On the contrary, he sank even deeper into thought now. You have 5 seconds left, Eliade prompted once more. Decide. At Eliade's final reminder, Shi Feng snapped out of his daze and took a deep breath. Lady Eliade, I choose the guidance on my epic mana body. Shi Feng said with determination. Are you certain? Eliade asked, gazing at him seriously. I am very certain, Shi Feng confirmed, nodding. In his opinion, a mana technique was indeed amazing. In fact, the value of Iliadi's mana technique surpassed even the value of legendary items. However, gaining the ability to unlock his epic mana body past the 100% threshold was much more important, since a player's mana body was the foundation for everything. In his previous life, every player that had set foot into the realm of Tier 6 had broken through the 100% threshold. If he wanted to have a chance at reaching Tier 6, then he had to develop his mana body beyond 100%. As for Iliadi's mana technique, while it indeed could increase players' combat power by a substantial degree, tiers trumped everything else. This was especially true for Tier 6. Even if said Tier 5 player was armed with an extremely powerful legendary weapon, they would, at most, be able to fight the weakest of Tier 6 players to a standstill. Defeating a Tier 6 player would be utterly impossible. Needless to say, it would be the same when relying on mana techniques. During ancient times, humans possessed complete mana technique legacies. Nevertheless, they were still incapable of contending against Tier 6 gods. Hence, tiers were everything in God's domain. Take the current God's domain, for example. Tier 2 players were helpless against Tier 3 players. This was the case even for the various superpowers Tier 2 experts. Currently, the various superpowers could compete with each other only by using Tier 3 players. Even if Tier 2 players were amazing and could defeat current Tier 3 experts, if they were incapable of promoting to Tier 3 themselves, it was only a matter of time before they were left behind by Tier 3 players in terms of basic attributes as players reached higher levels. Excellent. When Iliadi heard Shi Feng's determined reply, an exquisite smile appeared on her flawless face. At the same time, the sound of a system notification entered Shi Feng's ears once more. System, congratulations. You have passed the hidden trial, selection of power, and received Iliadi's recognition. A hidden trial? Shi Feng received a fright when he heard this system notification. He never thought that this challenge would actually include a hidden trial. NPCs in God's domain had different personalities. Normally, they only gave players straightforward trials. However, there were NPCs that would give players double trials. In the case of these double trials, if players failed to clear the hidden trial, clearing the surface trial would be meaningless. They still wouldn't receive any rewards. Since you have chosen to seek guidance on your mana body, it seems you have not been misled by the temptation of power. During ancient times, humans have constantly pursued the ultimate strength. Although they eventually obtained this ultimate strength, they also faced destruction because of it, Iliadi said. In a pleased tone, she continued, you, however, did not fall prey to the power I displayed. You have passed my trial. From now onward, you are my successor and are qualified to obtain my legacy. System, congratulations. You have completed the challenge of the heavenly blue saint, Iliadi, and become her successor. Rewarding mana body legacy and holy annihilation technique legacy. After the system notification ended, Iliadi took out 2 memory crystals that gave off a colorful glow and handed them to Shi Feng. Of these 2 memory crystals, one of them records the method to unlock epic mana bodies, and the other records the mana technique I created. You may use each of them only once. I hope you utilize them properly, Iliadi said before vanishing without a trace, leaving behind only a stunned Shi Feng at the foot of the sacred mountain. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. That was really close. Shi Feng sighed in relief after Iliadi disappeared. If not for him having long known the importance of the mana body and the strength of tiers, he would have most likely chosen Iliadi's mana technique instead. After all, from what he had seen, Iliadi's mana technique would provide players with a huge boost in combat power. So long as current Tier 3 players learned Iliadi's mana technique, their combat power would soar to the peak of Tier 3, possibly even the Tier 4 standard. Meanwhile, if one possessed Tier 4 combat power at this stage of the game, they would definitely be invincible among players. Who could possibly resist such a temptation? However, if he had really chosen to acquire Iliadi's mana technique, he would have ended up with nothing at all. Now that I have obtained the mark and legacy, it's time to return. After snapping out of his daze, Shi Feng stored the 2 memory crystals before making his way to the teleportation array for leaving the sacred mountain. He did not hurry to use the memory crystals. After all, they were one-off items. How much knowledge he could absorb from them would depend entirely on himself. It would be a huge waste if he did not use the memory crystals in an ideal state and environment. Chapter 2467, Legacy Room. Star Valley, Starlight Fortress. A spatial tear appeared before the entrance of the Fortress Lord's mansion as Shi Feng teleported out of the Legacy Gate. Currently, several figures were resting before the entrance, every one of which looked exhausted, as if they had just fought a battle that lasted several days and nights. Their eyes were bloodshot, and their bodies were felt weak and sore all over. Guild leader? A trace of surprise flashed in Kola's eyes when he saw Shi Feng coming out of the spatial tear. Aside from Kola, Shadow Sword, Turtledove, Alluring Summer, and Luofe, who sat beside him, were similarly stunned by this scene. They knew what the situation inside the Legacy Gate was very clearly. Out of their team of 10, the one with the highest chance of clearing the first level was undoubtedly Shi Feng. Now, however, Shi Feng was actually the 6th person to come out of the Legacy Gate. This development boggled their minds. After all, in terms of combat standards and basic attributes, Shi Feng was the strongest among them. Even the standard of his mana body was unmatched. Theoretically, even if Shi Feng failed to conquer the Sacred Mountain's first level, he still should have been the last one to come out of the Legacy Gate. Ignoring the strange gazes Kola and the others were giving him, Shi Feng asked, "Only the 5 of you have come out?" "Emichim. Big Sis Fire and the others are still inside." Kola nodded stiffly. They made such huge improvements during this period? Shi Feng was surprised by this situation. The fact that Fire Dance and the others remained inside the Legacy Gate until now meant that they were close to clearing the Sacred Mountain's first level already. The first level of a Gold Gate's Sacred Mountain. Shi Feng had personally experienced the difficulty of the Gold Gate's trial. From his experience, everyone, aside from Yan Tianqing, shouldn't have much of a chance at clearing the Sacred Mountain's first level. After all, the Gold Gate's trial placed much more importance on players' combat standards than on basic attributes. No matter how powerful their basic attributes were, their attacks couldn't be stronger than those of Tier 3 NPCs that had fully unlocked their mana bodies. Meanwhile, of those that had come to the Western continent with Shi Feng this time, Aqua Rose, Fire Dance, and Violet Cloud, 3 of the 4 players that had entered the Tower of 4 Gods, remained inside although he had already exited. Gentle Snow was staying in the Black Dragon Empire to handle the guild's affairs. Shi Feng never thought that Aqua Rose, Fire Dance, and Violet Cloud would last this long inside the Legacy Gate. Although he had already known that all 3 of them had reached the Void Realm standard and that Violet Cloud had even learned a bronze combat technique, they still shouldn't be capable of surviving until now. However, Shi Feng quickly shook his head, not dwelling on the matter. After all, the stronger Aqua Rose and the others became, the better it would be for Zero Wing. Following which, he looked at Kola and the others and asked, "Right, what kind of gains did you get inside? How much of your mana body did you manage to unlock?" The real treasure hidden inside an ancient fortress was the mana body legacy. Hence, it did not matter whether players managed to clear the fortress's legacy trial or not. The crucial part was how much players learned from the legacy trial. If players simply focused on clearing the trial and failed to learn anything, then it would be a huge loss. "I've already unlocked it to 75%, Kola replied in a slightly prideful tone. Although he was the first person to exit the Legacy Gate, he had unlocked the most potential out of their group of 5. In fact, had he managed to push through one more batch of opponents, he might have been able to unlock 80% of his mana body's potential. It should be known that every 10% potential unlocked in a mana body would enhance one's normal attacks, skills, and spells significantly. Upon hearing Kola's prideful tone, Shadow Sword and the others eyed him with contempt. Kola had unlocked merely 5% to 10% more potential than they had. That was nothing for him to boast about. Shortly after Shadow Sword and the others finished reporting their progress, for spatial tiers suddenly opened up before the Fortress Lord's mansion, one after another. A figure then walked out of each spatial tier. These 4 figures belonged to none other than Aqua Rose and the rest of the Zero Wing contingent. At the same time as Aqua Rose and the others exited, an additional bronze mark appeared on Shi Feng's Fortress Lord's token. The knights on the 2nd level are simply overpowered. Every one of their attacks rivals mythic monsters. Who could possibly block those attacks? Yan Tianqing's expression turned ugly when he was teleported out of the Legacy Gate. You cleared the 1st level? Shi Feng asked as he took in Yan Tianqing's miserable state. But the 2nd level is far too difficult. Those knights are basically at the tier 4 standard already, and they're even more difficult than mythic monsters, Yan Tianqing replied, nodding with some disappointment at this outcome. Not bad. The 2nd level's knights all possess gold magic bodies. Their magic bodies are not the slightest bit inferior to yours. Moreover, their magic bodies are fully unlocked while yours is not. If multiple knights gang up on you, it is only natural for you to get defeated, Shi Feng said, not the slightest bit surprised by this outcome. He then swept his gaze over Yan Tianqing's group of 4 and asked, how far have you gotten in unlocking your mana bodies? NPC knights that possessed gold mana bodies simply had too large an advantage over current players like themselves. Even Shi Feng would have to activate Heavenly Dragon's power to block their attacks. I currently have it unlocked up to 90%, Yan Tianqing reported, slightly disappointed. It would be great if I could have continued fighting for a little while longer. Kola and the others gazed at him enviously, upon hearing that. They never thought that the 2nd level's NPC knights actually possessed gold mana bodies. Gaining the opportunity to observe these knights would definitely provide them with significant help. I'm just a little ways off myself. I managed to unlock mine up to 95%. If I could continue observing for 20 more minutes, I might have been able to unlock my mana body completely, Aqua Rose said, thoroughly bummed. The mana that the 2nd level's knights exuded was simply too frightening. Every one of their attacks carried power close to the tier 4 standard. Moreover, they also possessed very high combat standards, basically rivaling refinement realm experts. Worst of all, her ability to wield mana was restricted due to the harsh environment. Fire Dance and Violet Cloud similarly shook their heads in frustration. Although both of them had unlocked 95% of their mana body's potential, they still couldn't contend against the 2nd level's knights. Right, guild leader, Divine Tribe contacted me previously. They said that there is something they need to discuss with us. However, as we were still inside the Legacy Gate, I told them that we had some urgent matters to deal with and had them rest inside their temporary residence for now, Aqua Rose suddenly said. That isn't an urgent matter, Shi Feng said, chuckling. It'll be the same if we go after all of you have fully unlocked your mana bodies. Unlock our mana bodies? Aqua Rose was puzzled by Shi Feng's words. They had just come out of the Legacy Gate. Without the help of the Legacy Gate, it would be incredibly difficult for them to make any more progress. Fully unlocking their mana bodies might even take up to a fortnight. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU, Msham. An ancient fortress's Legacy Gate is indeed the fastest place for players to unlock their mana bodies. However, the Fortress Lord's mansion has something called a Legacy Room. Although its training effects aren't as excellent as the Legacy Gates, it allows players to experience a fully unlocked mana body for 3 minutes. I believe this experience should be of significant help for you all, Shi Feng said, nodding. The Legacy Room was the core of the Fortress Lord's mansion. Only after players obtained the rights to control the Fortress Lord's mansion would they be allowed to use it. Moreover, the room could be used only 12 times a month, and each player could use it only once a month. During Shi Feng's previous life, the various superpowers that controlled an ancient fortress allowed only peak experts that were close to fully unlocking their mana bodies to make use of the Legacy Room. Now that Aqua Rose and the others had managed to unlock at least 70% of their mana body's potential, they would have a very high chance of fully unlocking their mana bodies if they utilized the Legacy Room. Shi Feng naturally had to let them try. After saying so, Shi Feng removed the seal on the Fortress Lord's mansion and led everyone inside. Chapter 2468, Silver Marks Effects. As Shi Feng and the others walked into the Fortress Lord's mansion, they felt as if their exhausted mental state had suddenly been refreshed. The mana density here is so high. Aqua Rose exclaimed when she sensed the mana inside the mansion. It's at least twice as high as in Zero Wing City. Out of all the guild towns and cities in God's domain, Zero Wing City's mana density was the highest. This was also why Zero Wing City remained extremely popular with players, even though it was located within Starmoon Kingdom's borders and in a map that was much lower level than mainstream players. Currently, the city's daily player traffic still exceeded 6 million. In Starmoon Kingdom, Zero Wing City's player traffic ranked third, inferior only to Starmoon City and White River City. However, despite the sparse mana in Star Valley, the inside of the Starlight Fortress's Fortress Lord's mansion had a mana density at least twice as high as Zero Wing City's. Of all the places Aqua Rose could think of, only the ambient mana in the Holy City of Titan was comparable to this mansion's in terms of density. With such an excellent environment, even training bronze combat techniques won't be a problem, Yan Tianxing commented, his eyes similarly glowing with excitement when he sensed the mana around him. Practicing combat techniques placed a huge burden on players' concentration. If the environment did not possess sufficiently dense mana, their concentration regeneration rate wouldn't be able to keep up with their consumption rate. Players would have to rest for a long time after practicing their combat techniques a few times. That sort of training would be inefficient. Meanwhile, bronze combat techniques were particularly exhausting to practice. Each use of a bronze combat technique consumed several times more concentration than an advanced combat technique. Moreover, if players hadn't mastered the bronze combat technique, using it would place an even greater burden on their stamina and concentration. Hence, the various superpowers had very few peak experts that had successfully learned a bronze combat technique even now. This was also the case for Zero Wing. This place isn't just useful for practicing bronze combat techniques. Looking at the excitement on everyone's faces, Shi Feng pointed at a nearby locked room and explained, there are also mana training rooms here. In there, players can practice not only combat techniques but also mana control. The efficiency of training inside one of these rooms is several times higher than training in the outside world. It is no exaggeration to say that these rooms are one of the best places for training. As a fortress that had existed since ancient times, the Starlight Fortress was not as simple as it appeared to be. The standard of magical technology that the fortress possessed was something that current kingdoms and empires could only admire. This was also why the various superpowers during Shi Feng's previous life had contested over ancient fortresses desperately. Unfortunately, the Starlight Fortress was only a small fortress. Its Fortress Lord's mansion also wasn't very large, with only 5 floors in total, 3 above ground and 2 underground. Meanwhile, every one of these floors was enhanced by all sorts of magic arrays that increased the density of the ambient mana, as well as accelerated the concentration recovery rate of players. Players could also accumulate the double EXP buff while within the Fortress Lord's mansion, so they wouldn't have to worry about falling behind in terms of levels, even if they spent a long time training within the mansion. As for the mana training rooms, the mansion had only 32. A medium fortress's Fortress Lord's mansion would have double the number, whereas a large fortress would have 150. The training capability of a large fortress was several times greater than that of a small fortress. With the Starlight Fortress, Zero Wing would be able to nurture only a small number of the guild's experts. However, this was the best Shi Feng could do right now. After all, the difficulty of capturing medium and large fortresses was many times higher. Generally, large fortresses had superior mythics guarding them, while medium fortresses also had a small chance that a superior mythic would appear as its final guardian boss. Medium fortresses would also have over a dozen other mythic monsters inside. A medium fortress simply wasn't something a few players and a Tier 4 hero could capture at this stage of the game. In fact, during Shi Feng's previous life, the various superpowers had managed to capture Star Valley's medium and large fortresses only after Tier 4 players had come into existence. After Shi Feng gave everyone a simple introduction, he brought them to the mansion's second basement floor. The second basement floor was not very large and had only 2 rooms. One of these rooms was the core room responsible for controlling the fortress's magic array, while the other room was sealed shut by a large door made out of magic crystals. The room with the magic crystal door happened to be the most precious location in the entire Fortress Lord's mansion. The Legacy Room. This place was second only to the Legacy Gate in terms of helping players unlock their mana bodies. In the past, it had also been the most important location for the various superpowers for nurturing guild experts. In God's domain, the mana body might be considered merely a tool to support players, since it was only a matter of time before players fully unlocked their mana bodies after reaching Tier 3. However, the speed at which players unlocked their mana bodies would give rise to a marked disparity. This was because players' control over their mana bodies and combat styles would undergo significant changes after they unlocked their mana bodies. Meanwhile, they would need time to adapt to these changes. In addition, if players wished to improve their mana bodies further, in other words, break through the 100% threshold, they would first need to unlock their mana body's full potential. Only after doing so could they start attempting to break through the 100% threshold. The player's success would depend on whether they had taken the correct path or not. If players discovered that they had made a mistake, they could still change their method of approach in unlocking their mana body. Hence, the sooner one unlocked their mana body in God's domain, the better. Of course, the Legacy Room had a flaw. It could only allow players to experience what it felt to have a fully unlocked mana body based on their current foundations. It would not point out a clear path for players to take. Even so, having the help of the Legacy Room was still many times better than randomly experimenting in the outside world. After arriving before the 4-meter-tall and 3-meter-wide crystalline door, Shi Feng held up the Fortress Lord's token and chanted the incantation recorded on it to trigger the magic array etched into it. In the next moment, the token's magic array released a silver glow that resonated with the magic array carved into the crystalline door. The door's magic array likewise released a silver glow. Immediately afterward, the tightly shut door started opening, and everyone instantly felt mana of much greater density flowing out of the Legacy Room. When bathed in this mana, everyone felt their mind clearing up, invigorated like never before. At the same time, the sound of a system notification entered Shi Feng's ears. System, you have activated the Silver Legacy Room. This room can be used only 12 times a month, and only one player may enter each time. Players will be able to experience what their current mana body feels like at 100% potential for 5 minutes. Once the session ends, players will not be allowed re-entry into the Legacy Room for 1 natural month. The silver mark also provides such a benefit? Shi Feng gazed at the token in his hand in astonishment. The difference between 3 minutes and 5 minutes might not be very long, but being able to experience the sensation of a fully unlocked mana body for even a second longer meant that players could better familiarize themselves with that feeling. Meanwhile, the silver mark had nearly doubled the duration that players could carry it inside the Legacy Room. At this moment, Shi Feng more or less understood why the various superpowers had desperately invested into a select few peak experts and continuously had them challenge the Legacy Gate of the fortresses they controlled. They hadn't done so just to unlock more of their fortresses' functions but to better develop their guild experts. After all, guild experts were the capital of guilds. Everything else was secondary. Alright, which one of you will enter first? Shi Feng asked as he turned around to look at Aqua Rose and the others. Upon hearing Shi Feng's question, Aqua Rose and the others exchanged glances, unsure whether they should enter the Legacy Room or not. Shi Feng had already told them that this opportunity was available to them only once a month. If they did not grab a hold of it properly, they would have to wait another month to experience what fully unlocking their mana bodies felt like. At that time, everything would be too late already. I'll go first, then, Fire Dance said after giving the matter some thought. Alright. Just walk straight into the room. Once you're inside, focus all your attention on your mana body and try your best to adapt to the sensations you feel, Shi Feng advised as he pointed into the legacy room, which was the size of half a basketball court. The situation inside the legacy room was the complete opposite of the situation inside the legacy gate. Instead of a sparse mana environment, the legacy room's environment abounded with mana. While standing inside such a room, players would find it practically impossible to perceive the flow of mana inside their own bodies clearly. They could only rely on their intuition to progress. I understand. Fire Dance nodded before walking into the room. Meanwhile, after Fire Dance entered the legacy room, the crystalline door sealed itself once more. Everyone's heartbeat started accelerating at the sight. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. No need to be anxious. Even if you fail to fully unlock your mana body this time, you can still continue trying in the outside world. It is only a matter of time before you unlock your mana body. Just treat this as an opportunity to experience it ahead of time, Shi Feng said, smiling when he saw how nervous everyone was. The opportunity the legacy room provided was indeed very important. However, even if one failed to fully unlock their mana body after entering the legacy room, it did not mean that they wouldn't be able to unlock their mana body in the future. They merely had to pay a higher price to do so. At this moment, Aqua Rose suddenly received a message. After reading it, she turned to Shi Feng and said, "Guild leader, McCaffrey sent me another message. He says something big has happened, and he needs you to pay him a visit now." Is it so urgent? Shi Feng was a little confused as to why McCaffrey kept trying to contact him. Alright, it's best if I go first. The legacy room is already activated. Enter it one by one. After leaving these instructions, Shi Feng immediately exited the Fortress Lord's mansion and made his way toward Divine Tribe's temporary residence in the Starlight Fortress. Chapter 2469, Storm Brewing Starlight Fortress, Divine Tribe's temporary residence. After undergoing the Silver Lion Legion's cleansing, the fortress that was originally ruled by monsters was now devoid of monsters. Instead, players now crowded it. Moreover, these players were all very high level and very well equipped. They were undoubtedly Divine Tribe's experts. At this moment, these expert players were agog as they walked through the streets of the Starlight Fortress, which had already become the focus of many powers and players. As a fortress located in Star Valley, a level 100 plus forbidden land, the Starlight Fortress's functions were simply immense. Not only could it allow players to save up on plenty of travel time, but it could also serve as a player's haven for rest and recovery. At the same time, it would become a trade hub in Star Valley. After all, Star Valley was massive. Moreover, players had nowhere to rest in the surrounding maps. Besides, Star Valley was rich in resources, a place where players could obtain leveling resources. Hence, as the only trade hub available in Star Valley, the resources the Starlight Fortress could acquire in the future would be immeasurable. As a fortress that had existed since ancient times, the Starlight Fortress's ambient mana was incredibly dense. None of the present fortresses found in the outside world had anything similar. On the western continent, which suffered from a dearth of mana, the Starlight Fortress was a rare training ground. Shi Feng could sympathize with the excitement Divine Tribe's members felt. After players captured an ancient fortress, not only could they concentrate a large amount of mana inside the fortress, but this mana would also be very gentle. Even players with subpar control over mana would have their control artificially improved by a significant margin while inside the fortress. Although this improvement was only temporary, if players could immerse themselves in such an environment long-term, they could use this experience to achieve a permanent improvement. To the Western Continent's players, who prioritized control over mana before control over their physical bodies, the Starlight Fortress was an absolute gem of a training ground. Guild leader Black Flame, the vice commander and the others are all waiting inside the reception room. Please, follow me. Shortly after Shi Feng arrived before the entrance of Divine Tribe's residence, a middle-aged man, who was a level 106 Guardian Knight, approached him. This middle-aged man gave off a very kind and humble feeling. However, the aura he radiated was not the slightest bit weaker than that of Grand Lords of the same level. In terms of strength, he was most likely stronger than even the Silver Lion Legion's Crimson Witch. "I'll have to trouble you, then," Shi Feng replied. Inwardly, he sighed ruefully as he considered this humble, middle-aged man. In the current Zero Wing, Yan Tianxing and Shi Feng himself were the only ones that had reached the domain realm. However, just one day after he captured the Starlight Fortress, Divine Tribe revealed another domain realm expert to him. Shi Feng could not help but admit that superpowers were indeed amazing. It would most likely be a long time before Zero Wing could catch up to them. After hearing Shi Feng's reply, the middle-aged man led Shi Feng into Divine Tribe's residence. Upon entering the residence's guild hall, Shi Feng received something of a fright. At this moment, the residence's guild hall had been fully renovated. Not only did the interior of the building look splendid, but the floors of the building were even tiled using mana Oregon. Not even the guild hall in Zero Wing's main headquarters could compete with this guild hall in terms of extravagance. Mana ore was a rare type of ore. Although it was not as valuable as magic crystals, it contained a significant amount of mana. Items made with mana ore would exude a small amount of mana and increase the density of the mana in their vicinity by a certain degree. However, as the cost generally wasn't worth the potential returns, very few superpowers would be willing to use mana ore as flooring. Meanwhile, this was only a temporary residence for Divine Tribe, yet the guild had actually used mana ore as flooring. This was already beyond extravagance and entered the realm of reckless waste. However, from this, one could also see how much importance Divine Tribe placed on this temporary residence. After all, if the temporary residence changed owners, the mana ore used here could not be taken away. If Zero Wing suddenly decided to change partners, Divine Tribe's actions would be akin to gifting its mana ore to another power. However, despite knowing this, Divine Tribe had still done so. A short moment later, under the middle-aged man's lead, Shi Feng arrived at the top-floor reception room. Currently, 3 people were seated inside the reception room: McCaffrey Crimson Witch, whom Shi Feng was familiar with, and a beautiful female berserker with blonde hair and crimson eyes. This female berserker wore silvery, gray light armor and carried a runic greatsword that radiated mana. Although this female berserker was only sitting quietly inside the room, it was as if she had stolen all the color from her surroundings. Aside from herself, everything else inside the room looked monotone in color. The Magic Eye Goddess? Why is she here? Shi Feng was stunned when he saw this female berserker. This was because he was even more familiar with this woman than with McCaffrey and Crimson Witch. She was one of the few Tier 6 God-ranked experts in his previous life, the wielder of Eternal Sin, a legendary weapon. In the past, she had ranked high even among Tier 6 experts. She had also managed to develop the guild she established herself into a super first-rate guild, becoming a legend in God's domain. Meanwhile, because of the peak hidden class, Magic Eye Hunter, she obtained, she was also nicknamed the Magic Eye Goddess. Currently, however, this Magic Eye Goddess was wearing Divine Tribe's guild emblem. This situation was completely different from what Shi Feng knew. Guild leader Black Flame, are you two perhaps acquainted with each other? McCaffrey asked curiously when he noticed the change in Shi Feng's expression. After calming himself, Shi Feng shook his head and explained, "No, we're not acquainted. She just looks very similar to someone I know." At Shi Feng's reply, McCaffrey no longer paid much attention to the matter, saying, "In that case, let me introduce you. This person here is Phythalia, the commander of Divine Tribe's Divine Hymn Legion. She will also be in charge of the Divine Tribe forces that will be garrisoned in the Starlight Fortress from now on. Greetings. I am Zero Wing's guild leader, Black Flame," Shi Feng introduced himself as he looked at Phythalia. "Greetings as well, guild leader Black Flame. I had heard plenty about you from Crimson even before I came here. However, after seeing you in person, it seems you're even stronger than what I heard. You are actually unaffected within my illusory domain. It seems you have already unlocked your mana body to a considerable extent," Phythalia said, a flash of surprise appearing in her eyes as she looked at Shi Feng. After obtaining her Magic Eye Hunter hidden class, she had gained a naturally occurring domain that grew stronger the higher her tier became. After she reached tier 3, even Crimson Witch, who possessed a peak gold mana body, was not immune to the effects of her illusory domain. Within her illusory domain, not only would players' control of their own body's mana decline significantly, but players would also lose the ability to control the mana around them. At this point, only experts that had unlocked their mana bodies by a certain extent were capable of resisting the effects of her illusory domain. "You have started unlocking your mana body already?" Crimson Witch blurted out when she heard Phythalia's words. She had been researching how she could unlock her mana body's potential all this time. However, even now, she still hadn't found any concrete information. She had never imagined that Shi Feng had actually unlocked a portion of his mana body's potential already. "It's just a portion. I'm still far from fully unlocking it," Shi Feng admitted truthfully. "So, that's the case. No wonder your attacks were so powerful before." Realization dawned upon Crimson Witch when she heard Shi Feng's reply. Previously, she had felt that the skills and spells Shi Feng had used were ridiculously powerful. They looked nothing like tier 3 skills and spells used by the current tier 3 players. In hindsight, this was most likely due to Shi Feng having unlocked a portion of his mana body's strength already, hence, his skills and spells were a lot more powerful than the average tier 3 players. Suddenly, she felt that she had a chance to catch up with Shi Feng. Although she hadn't started unlocking her mana body yet, she did have a few leads. She was confident she could unlock a portion of her mana body's strength in a few more days. At that time, she would no longer lose to Shi Feng so easily. "May I know why you asked me to come here?" Shi Feng asked, not bothering with additional explanations on his mana body. "It's an urgent matter," Phythalia replied, her expression suddenly turning serious. "Before I arrived at the Starlight Fortress, I received word that plenty of superpowers are making their way to the Starlight Fortress. Even Netherworld Empire, one of the 5 great super guilds, is interested. In fact, Netherworld Empire has dispatched one of its trump card legions. We might be able to deal with the other superpowers, but Netherworld Empire is a different story. Although Netherworld Empire's trump card legion has very few members, those players can no longer be referred to as humans. They are complete and utter monsters. Setting aside the high likelihood that they are coming to contest for the fortress's ruling rights, if they decide to make a fuss inside the fortress, no one will be able to control them. Even if we continue holding on to the fortress's ruling rights, we will only be rulers in name. Normal operations would be impossible. Hence, I asked you to visit in hopes you can sell a portion of the fortress's shares." Guild leader Black Flame. "Divine Tribe will help Zero Wing as a middleman in this matter. If we include the Crimson Dragon flying ship you have in the Starlight Fortress's defenses, I believe Netherworld Empire will not go too far." In regard to Phythalia's suggestion, neither McCaffrey or Crimson Witch found anything wrong with it. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. On the Western continent, there was nobody that did not know how frightening Netherworld Empire was. It could be said to be a gathering of lunatics. This great super guild never operated according to social norms or logic. In fact, it had already annihilated one superpower in God's domain. If Zero Wing and Divine Tribe were to clash with Netherworld Empire, even if they managed to protect the fortress itself still wouldn't be able to establish itself on the Western continent. Their only way out now was to split a portion of the fortress's profits. After all, the Starlight Fortress involved too many things. Zero Wing and Divine Tribe couldn't stop all of the Western continent's superpowers. However, it would be a different story if they had Netherworld Empire's assistance. "I understand Divine Tribe's predicament," Shi Feng said, nodding. Smiling, he continued, "As for the Starlight Fortress's matters, leave them to Zero Wing. If Netherworld Empire wishes to cause a ruckus, it is free to try. If it is capable of doing so, I wouldn't mind gifting the fortress to it. If there are no other matters, I'll take my leave first." After saying so, Shi Feng turned around and left the reception room, his actions stunning Phythalia, McCaffrey, and Crimson Witch. For a time, silence fell over the entire reception room. Chapter 2470. Fortress unlocked. Quite some time had passed after Shi Feng left the reception room before Phythalia and the others managed to snap out of their daze. Has guild leader Black Flame always been such an impulsive person? Phythalia could not help but ask as she turned to look at McCaffrey and Crimson Witch. Her mind couldn't keep up with Shi Feng's pace at all. When fighting over interests, superpowers rarely started with a declaration of war. They would generally choose to settle things with discussions. Only if negotiations broke down would they take action. After all, a war between two superpowers was no trivial matter. Regardless of the outcome, both sides would end up suffering significant, and even irreparable, losses. Meanwhile, she had merely proposed to negotiate with Netherworld Empire and asked Shi Feng to prepare to make some minor concessions, yet Shi Feng had flat out rejected her proposal and decided to clash with the Great Super Guild to the very end. This simply wasn't a decision a guild leader would make. Only a fool would do so. Of course, she also found Shi Feng's decision understandable. Zero Wing had gone to great lengths to capture the Starlight Fortress. However, just as it was about to start harvesting its profits, a bunch of people suddenly appeared to claim a share of these profits. Any normal person would get enraged by this matter. However, such a situation frequently occurred in both the real world and the virtual world. In a situation where one was weaker than the other party, opting for a frontal clash was an extremely unwise decision. This was especially true now that more than a dozen superpowers were targeting the Starlight Fortress. So long as one of these superpowers took the lead, they would attack the Starlight Fortress without hesitation. At that time, even if these superpowers failed to capture the Starlight Fortress, they would still cripple its operation. Unlike other fortresses, the Starlight Fortress did not have any NPC soldiers to assist in its management. Players had to rely entirely on themselves. Moreover, the ruling power would have only partial authority over the fortress and was incapable of prohibiting entry to certain players by manipulating the fortress magic array. If the ruling power wished to prevent entry to certain players, it would have to rely on its own players to do so. This was also the case when it came to settling fights that occurred within the fortress. Meanwhile, over a dozen superpowers were targeting the Starlight Fortress, including Netherworld Empire. So long as these superpowers dispatched experts to cause a ruckus inside the Starlight Fortress, stopping them would be impossible with the manpower and strength Zero Wing and Divine Tribe possessed. In fact, Zero Wing and Divine Tribe wouldn't even be able to stop the various superpowers from entering the Starlight Fortress. If this situation persisted, who would dare visit the Starlight Fortress? Guild leader Black Flame is indeed a very straightforward person. However, even I did not expect him to be so resolute in his stance that he won't even negotiate, McCaffrey said. Likewise, Shi Feng's decisive response exceeded his expectations. Commander Phythalia, what should we do next? There is no room for discussions on Zero Wing's side. Are we really going to clash with the various superpowers? Crimson Witch asked worriedly. After partnering with Zero Wing, Divine Tribe had invested a huge amount of resources into developing its temporary residence in the Starlight Fortress. Divine Tribe had even drafted a series of plans around the Starlight Fortress and invested a large portion of the guild's resources into these plans. If the Starlight Fortress really became a no-man's land, then Divine Tribe's investments would come to naught. I am familiar with Hell Rush, the commander of Netherworld Empire's trump card Legion. Since he is personally leading the Legion over, I will try to negotiate with him, Phythalia said, chuckling when she saw the worried expression on Crimson Witch's face. Moreover, we still haven't reached that point yet. Once the various superpowers Netherworld Empire's members arrive, guild leader Black Flame might realize how unwise his decision is. At that time, we might be able to turn things around. She had seen plenty of people like Shi Feng before. After all experts were very arrogant. Not to mention, Zero Wing had managed to capture the Starlight Fortress, something none of the Western Continent's superpowers had managed. It was only natural for him to have confidence in his guild's strength and not be afraid to fight the various superpowers. However, once the various superpowers experts gathered and Shi Feng personally experienced the strength of these superpowers, it wouldn't be strange if he changed his mind. After all, he had just arrived on the Western continent recently and did not understand just how powerful the superpowers here were. He also wasn't aware of just how formidable Netherworld Empire was. While Phythalia and the others were discussing how to deal with the various superpowers, Shi Feng arrived at the main office on the Fortress Lord's mansion's third floor to assume control over the entire Starlight Fortress. Previously, although he had unlocked the magic array sealing the Fortress Lord's mansion and even allowed Fire Dance and the others to enter the mansion's legacy room, he still hadn't gained control over the Starlight Fortress. This was because an ancient fortress's Fortress Lord's token did not automatically confer the ruling rights to the fortress on its holder. Players still needed to go through a simple takeover procedure. When Shi Feng opened the doors to the main office, he was greeted by the sight of an elderly man in butler attire standing inside the old and obsolete office. Although this elderly man was only a phantom and radiated no aura, he was a near-invincible existence while inside this Fortress Lord's mansion. At the same time, he was the true ruler of the entire Starlight Fortress. Wielder of the Fortress Lord's token, I am Osset, the Starlight Fortress's administrator. How may I be of service? Osset asked respectfully when he saw Shi Feng enter. I wish to receive control over the Starlight Fortress, Shi Feng said, declaring his intentions. Ancient fortresses were different from other fortresses. All authority over the fortress was vested in the administrator. Hence, ancient fortresses would always remain in a semi-controlled state. If players holding the Fortress Lord's token wished to gain any control over the ancient fortress they captured, they had to get it from the fortress's administrator. Meanwhile, an administrator would pass on their authority only if players possessed the Fortress Lord's mark obtained from the fortress's legacy gate. Otherwise, they would only be a fake Fortress Lord, who could be replaced at any given time. Before players gained authority from the fortress administrator, the entire fortress would acknowledge only the Fortress Lord's token and not its holder. Moreover, the Fortress Lord's token offered no protection to players. And worse, players had to keep the Fortress Lord's token at all times. If the token was brought out of the fortress for too long, it would be automatically teleported back to the fortress and appear in a random location inside. Only by obtaining a Fortress Lord's mark and, subsequently, authority from the fortress administrator would players be considered the partial ruler of an ancient fortress. Players could then store their Fortress Lord's token in the core room of the Fortress Lord's mansion, utilizing the mansion's defensive magic array to protect it. Unless someone else attacked the Fortress Lord's mansion and obtained the token from the core room, players would no longer have to worry about losing control over their fortress. Moreover, after obtaining the authority to rule an ancient fortress, players could also activate some of the fortress's functions. Among them, the most important would be the fortress prison. This was an incredible function that none of the newly constructed fortresses possessed. This function was incredible because it allowed the ruler of the fortress to imprison players. So long as players were captured, they would suffer a fate even worse than death. Unless players had fulfilled their sentence or someone outside destroyed the prison itself, imprisoned players couldn't come out of the fortress prison. It wouldn't matter even if the imprisoned players killed themselves, they would respawn right back in their cell. Getting imprisoned was a brutal penalty for players. After all, in God's domain, time was money, especially for frontline players. Being jailed and prevented from doing anything for several days would cause them to fall behind significantly. Meanwhile, the fortress prison of a small fortress, like the Starlight Fortress, could imprison players for a maximum of 8 days. 8 days. If an expert player suddenly lost 8 days' worth of time, they would most likely lose the will to continue living. This was why Shi Feng dared to oppose the various superpowers. So what if the various superpowers possessed a lot of experts? If they dared make a ruckus in the fortress, he would capture and imprison them all. He was eager to see just how many Tier 3 experts the various superpowers had for him to imprison for 8 days. As for destroying the fortress prison and freeing the imprisoned players, the various superpowers would be dreaming if they thought they could accomplish this feat. The fortress prison possessed an incredibly powerful defensive magic array. Once it was activated, even Tier 5 existences shouldn't think of breaking into the fortress prison. In fact, breaking into the Fortress Lord's mansion would be even easier than breaking into the fortress prison. Very well. Osset summoned a fourfold magic array beneath Shi Feng's feet. He then continued, after inspection, it seems you possess 1 bronze mark and 1 silver mark. You have automatically gained the Silver Fortress authority. You may activate 1 bronze fortress privilege and 1 silver fortress privilege. Do you wish to choose which privileges to activate now? Yes, Shi Feng said, nodding. Here is a list of all the bronze and silver privileges available. You may choose one from each category, Osset said, waving his hand. Immediately, a translucent screen appeared before Shi Feng. In the next moment, 2 columns of choices appeared on the screen. The first column was a list of the available bronze privileges. There was a total of 3 options: Fortress Prison, Fortress Restaurant, and Fortress Hotel. The second column listed the available silver privileges. Similarly, there were 3 options available: Manification Tower, Object Creation Tower, and Summoning Tower. So, these are the Starlight Fortress's silver privileges? Surprise flashed in Shi Feng's eyes as he looked at the 3 entries under the silver privileges column. He had seen many silver fortress privileges before. However, the Starlight Fortress's silver privileges could definitely rival those of large fortresses. The Manification Tower was something that could further increase the density of the fortress's ambient mana. Although the Starlight Fortress's mana density was already very high, if the effects of the Manification Tower were included, then its mana density would most likely surpass even Zero-Wing cities. The Object Creation Tower was a sacred training ground for lifestyle players because it housed advanced meditation rooms and intermediate research rooms. Even a player with subpar talent would have a high chance of becoming a master lifestyle player if they could constantly work inside the Object Creation Tower. The Summoning Tower was something Shi Feng had seen only once before inside a medium fortress. However, the Summoning Tower was categorized as a gold privilege back then. As its name suggested, the Summoning Tower had only one function: the summoning of creatures. Once provided with the appropriate medium, the Summoning Tower could summon creatures of a similar race to act as the fortress's guardian. The stronger the medium, the stronger the summoned creature would be. Only 1 creature could be summoned in a month, and only 1 creature could be maintained in existence at a time. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. This ability might not seem like much, but it was incredibly powerful in reality. This was because there were no restrictions on the creature that could be summoned. In other words, if players managed to get their hands on the remains of a Tier 6 god, they could summon a Tier 6 god to defend their fortress. A Tier 6 god. This was an existence that even Tier 6 god-ranked players had to avoid crossing. If the Starlight Fortress had a Tier 6 god defending it, let alone attacking the fortress, nobody would dare make a scene in the entire map because the entire map the fortress sat on lay within the Fortress Guardian's range of activity. Wielder of the Fortress Lord's token, please make your decision, Osset reminded Shi Feng after seeing the latter remaining quiet for a long time. Chapter 2471, Summoning Tower Activated Osset's reminder snapped Shi Feng out of his daze. I choose the Fortress Prison and Summoning Tower. Shi Feng immediately answered. Of the bronze privileges available, the Fortress Prison was mandatory in Shi Feng's mind. Without this function, he couldn't deter his enemies from causing trouble within the fortress. As for the silver privileges, the Manification Tower and Object Creation Tower would increase the ancient fortress's value and make it more popular among players. However, the Starlight Fortress was the only captured fortress in Star Valley, and as such, had no competition. Any player that wanted to develop in Star Valley would have no choice but to visit the Starlight Fortress, which made both towers unnecessary. The Summoning Tower, on the other hand, was a different story. Of the 3 silver privileges, only the Summoning Tower would grant Zero-Wing more control over the Starlight Fortress, which is what the guild needed more than anything right now. Zero-Wing only had 10 members on the Western continent, and if it weren't for Divine Tribe's help, it wouldn't have been able to manage the fortress, even if it had managed to capture it. If the Summoning Tower were added into the equation, however, that wouldn't be the case. As long as Zero-Wing summoned a sufficiently formidable creature, it'd be able to hold the fortress even with almost no members. The summoned creature would follow the basic behavioral conditions players set. Players could instruct the summoned creature to defend the fortress lord's mansion, for example, or prevent certain people from entering the fortress. Players could also direct the creature to deal with any players that started fights within, as well. Combined with the fortress prison, no player would dare cause a scene in this fortress. Of course, this would only be the case if the summoned creature was strong enough. If the summoned creature couldn't kill or suppress players quickly enough, the summoning tower would be little more than decoration. Unlike the Manification Tower and Object Creation Tower that provided clear benefits, the summoning tower would only be as useful as the summoned creature. Moreover, nurturing a summoned creature would require a lot of resources. At first, players would summon the creature at their level. To increase the creature's level, players would have to invest resources. The amount of resources required would depend on the summoned creature's standards. The more powerful the creature was, the more resources it would require to level up. Based on the rumors Shi Feng had heard, the daily cost of maintaining a Tier 5 demonic creature was already on par with an ordinary first-rate guild's total daily net profits. Without sufficient resources, players simply couldn't support the summoning tower's use. Shi Feng wasn't concerned with that issue right now, however. The Starlight Fortress was the only fortress under player control throughout Star Valley at the moment, and it was also very close to the map's God Mode regional dungeon. If Shi Feng could establish his rule over the regional dungeon, he'd easily earn more daily income from the fortress alone to surpass first-rate guild's total daily income. He could make a fortune just by collecting entrance fees. Ancient fortresses were not managed by NPCs, which meant that players didn't have to split the entrance fees with the system. Players would receive 100% of the collected entrance fees. Moreover, a small fortress could charge a maximum of 20 silver per person. This was one of the reasons that ancient fortresses had been so popular among the various superpowers in the past. Once Shi Feng had made his decision, Osset began to chant an incantation. The ghostly NPC then drew a mysterious rune and imprinted it on the fortress lord's token in Shi Feng's hand. Suddenly, a translucent screen appeared above the token, listing the 6 privileges Shi Feng had observed earlier. 2 privileges text gave off a dull glow: the fortress prison and the summoning tower. Starlight Fortress Prison, status, unlocked activation cost, 30,000 magic crystals daily operating cost, 3,000 magic crystals. Do you wish to activate the Starlight Fortress Prison? Starlight Fortress Summoning Tower, status, unlocked activation cost, 50,000 magic crystals daily operating cost, 5,000 magic crystals. Do you wish to activate the Starlight Fortress Summoning Tower? Seeing the prompts, Shi Feng chose to activate the Summoning Tower first, setting aside the Fortress Prison for the moment. The Starlight Fortress was still sealed, and outsiders weren't allowed to enter. Shi Feng didn't need to hurry to activate the Fortress Prison. Magic crystals didn't grow on trees, after all, and if he activated the prison 2 days before the fortress opened to the public, he'd only waste 6,000 magic crystals. However, the sooner he activated the Summoning Tower, the better. Summoning creatures took time, and the more powerful the target creature was, the more time it would require to summon. In addition, nurturing the summoned creature required time. Shi Feng, who lacked time, wanted nothing more than to summon a creature immediately. If he were lucky, he might be able to level the creature up within the next 2 days. Monsters weren't like NPCs and players. As they leveled up, their basic attributes and combat power would rise to the peak of their level. In comparison, players and NPCs didn't receive such a huge strength boost upon leveling up. They would still need to upgrade weapons and equipment. Following which, Shi Feng sacrificed 100,000 magic crystals to the Fortress Lord's token, half of which would activate the Summoning Tower, while the remaining half would maintain its operation for 10 days. With the Summoning Tower's activation, a new rune rose from the token and imprinted itself on Shi Feng's right palm. System: you have successfully activated the Starlight Fortress Summoning Tower. The Summoning Tower's large-scale teleportation array is now active. You may utilize the summoning rune to teleport to the Summoning Tower at any time. The summoning rune has a cooldown of 1 natural day. The summoning tower had such an ability? A little surprised, Shi Feng glanced down at the summoning rune on his palm. There was nothing amazing about God's domain's teleportation arrays. Every NPC city had them. Players could even set them up in guild residences. However, these were all small or medium-scale teleportation arrays. Large-scale teleportation arrays were considered lost technology. Unlike the small and medium-scale teleportation arrays, large-scale teleportation arrays allowed players to teleport between the 2 main continents. The array in the summoning tower was a large-scale teleportation array, which meant that Shi Feng would be able to travel to the Starlight Fortress at any time, even from the eastern continent. Moreover, the summoning rune only had a 1-day cooldown, making it an incredibly convenient tool. Traveling between the main continents was an ordeal since ancient teleportation arrays that allowed players to travel between them had fixed teleportation times. If players missed the designated time, they'd have to wait until the next scheduled teleportation. This was particularly challenging for guilds that wanted to mingle on both continents. Prices for items constantly fluctuated, and if players couldn't offload their stock at the right time, doing so would become complicated. Not only would this summoning rune allow travel to the west far easier, but he could also bring whatever items the west needed at any given time. He'd be able to earn far more money from reselling the east's items than without it. After a brief moment of elation, Shi Feng activated the summoning rune and teleported to the summoning tower. The summoning tower was located in the Starlight Fortress's south end. The stone tower was the tallest building in the fortress, standing 200 meters tall. From the top of the tower, one could oversee everything within the fortress. As the teleportation array on the summoning tower's roof lit up, Shi Feng appeared in the tower. To Shi Feng's surprise, Osset waited for him on the summoning tower's roof, but unlike earlier, his body seemed more tangible. Wielder of the Fortress Lord's token, the summoning tower is now active. If you wish to summon a Fortress Guardian, I must inform you of 2 things. This array requires a medium of sufficient standards to summon a guardian. It cannot summon creatures without input. The more powerful the medium is, the stronger the summoned creature will be. Each summoning also has a 1-month cooldown. I hope you will use this summoning tower properly, Osset informed Shi Feng before transforming into mist and disappearing. Of course, Shi Feng had already known these factors. This information was precisely the reason he had chosen the summoning tower. This should be the place. After approaching the summoning altar on the roof, Shi Feng pulled a claw the size of an adult human from his bag, placing it on the altar. This claw had once belonged to the ice dragon, Heathwaite, and it was one of the only 2 legendary materials Shi Feng had on him. Initially, Shi Feng had wanted to use the ice dragon's claw once he had obtained an epic weapon design, but summoning an ice dragon wasn't a bad second choice. His summoned creature would protect the Starlight Fortress, and an ordinary monster simply wouldn't be up to the task. Although he could summon the Starlight Behemoth with the Behemoth Starlight Scales, that monster wasn't nearly as formidable as an ice dragon. As soon as Shi Feng rested the claw on the altar, he heard the sound of a system notification. System, the summoning altar has discovered the ice dragon's claw. Do you wish to analyze this medium? Begin. Taking a deep breath, Shi Feng made his decision. Not all mediums would work. If the selected medium didn't have enough energy, the summoning wouldn't happen. He already felt the painful sting of losing the ice dragon's claw. He didn't want to sacrifice 2 of them. Doing so would mean throwing away 2 epic weapons. As the altar began its analysis, dark purple smoke emerged from the summoning altar to envelop the gigantic claw. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. As the seconds passed, Shi Feng grew more nervous. If one ice dragon's claw weren't enough to summon an ice dragon, he'd have to summon the Starlight Behemoth with the Starlight Scales instead. The scales were inferior legendary materials, and he had a total of 5. They would certainly be more than enough to summon a Starlight Behemoth. While Shi Feng considered using the Starlight Scales as a replacement, he heard another system notification. System, medium's energy completion rate is at 89% and has met summoning requirements. Do you wish to summon the guardian? Summon. Chapter 2472, Silver Divine Dragon. Once Shi Feng agreed to begin the summoning, the purple smoke around the ice dragon's claw acted like a hungry wolf that had just found food. In no time, it devoured the stone-like claw. After devouring the claw, the intensity of the smoke's aura skyrocketed like a beast that had just woken from a long sleep. The frightening aura was so powerful that Shi Feng struggled to move. The aura was almost even stronger than that of a Tier 5 NPC. If a Tier 2 player stood in his place, they might have collapsed under the mighty pressure. As the purple smoke's aura grew stronger, the pressure Shi Feng felt increased as well. Just as he was about to fall to his knees, the purple smoke flowed into the summoning altar's ancient magic array. Boom! The instant the purple smoke merged with the magic array, space exploded, forming countless tears around the array. It was as if the surrounding space couldn't endure the power contained within the magic array. After several seconds, space in the center of the altar began to crumble, revealing a dark void. The void grew, and in the blink of an eye, it had swallowed nearly half of the altar. Just before the void reached Shi Feng, the magic array engraved on the summoning altar flashed with a silver light that instantly suppressed the void. It stopped the growing darkness at the edge of the altar, preventing its further expansion. However, due to the void's presence, the mana density around Shi Feng steadily decreased. A void land? Shi Feng stared at the black hole before him, astonished. What is going on? The summoning tower used a sacrificial medium to open a portal to an otherworld, from which players could guide their target creature. Naturally, the magic array would use stronger mediums to open stronger otherworlds. Yet, after devouring the ice dragon's claw, the summoning altar had opened a portal to a void land. A void land was a land of death, in which very few creatures in God's domain could survive. Void lands didn't even contain a trace of energy, much less mana. As Shi Feng stared, confused, the sound of a system notification reached his ears. System, you have triggered the epic quest, Void Cage. Quest content, release the Silver Divine Dragon that is imprisoned deep in the Void Land. Rewards unknown. There is no penalty for failing this quest. Do you wish to accept this quest? A Silver Divine Dragon? Shi Feng's astonishment only grew when he heard the notification. He had only used an ice dragon's claw as a medium. He had never expected it to trigger a portal to a Silver Divine Dragon's location. Dragons were the apex race in God's domain. Any random adult dragon had Tier 5 strength, and they were known as invincible among beings of the same tier. Not even human heroes, individuals who had received God's blessings, were a match for dragons of the same tier. However, not all dragons were equal. Divine dragons were dragons with the primeval dragon bloodline. Rather, they had a significant fraction of the primal dragon's bloodline. Normal dragons only had negligible traces of the primal dragon's bloodline. The difference between a divine dragon and an ordinary dragon's strength was on par with the difference between an archaic species and an ordinary monster. The two were on completely different levels. At most, ordinary dragons were invincible among creatures of the same tier. Divine dragons, however, could transcend tiers. Everyone in God's domain showed the proper respect before divine dragons. No one wanted to offend one. Shi Feng doubted that even the jealous witch, who was as devastating as a natural disaster, was a match for a Tier 5 divine dragon. With almost no hesitation, Shi Feng accepted the epic quest. Although there were no penalties for failing or refusing the epic quest, Shi Feng would have to abandon this summoning attempt by refusing it. If he did, he'd have to wait another month before he could attempt to summon another guardian, and he couldn't afford to do that. Moreover, encountering another opportunity to summon a divine dragon would likely be impossible, and if he could complete the quest, he'd hit the jackpot. Summoning a Tier 6 god in God's domain was almost impossible. Not a single super guild in Shi Feng's previous life had ever managed to acquire a corpse or body part of such a being. Needless to say, it was utterly out of Zero Wing's reach. Without a Tier 6 god, a Tier 5 divine dragon was the strongest possible guardian he could summon. After Shi Feng accepted the quest, the summoning altar formed a magic array beneath his feet, and a silver barrier took shape around him. Shi Feng could immediately feel the pressure bearing down on him subside. With this barrier to protect him, Shi Feng felt that surviving in the Void Land shouldn't pose much of an issue. Does it want me to enter the portal? Once the silver barrier was complete, Shi Feng noticed a new buff in his status window. This buff would last 3 natural days. A void land was an absolute forbidden land. Aside from gods and void souls, creatures born in void lands, surviving in a void land was nearly unheard of. Even with this magic barrier, he'd be lucky to exhibit 30% of his usual combat power. Void lands contained no mana, and Shi Feng hadn't fully unlocked his mana body yet. If he encountered a void soul in his state, he'd die. The weakest void soul was still on par with a Tier 4 mythic monster, while stronger void souls could rival adult dragon's strength. Knowing all of this, Shi Feng still gritted his teeth and entered the portal to the void land, taking the risk. Although void souls were incredibly powerful, there typically weren't many of them. The chance that he'd run across one in a massive void land was quite low. On the off chance that he did encounter a void soul, he could summon a Tier 4 hero with the hero's tome. Heroes were protected by the gods, and thus, their combat power would remain unaffected within a void land. With a Tier 4 hero by his side, he shouldn't have any problems as long as he wasn't spotted by any Tier 5 void souls. Shi Feng then entered the dark space, and the scene around him changed. Once the world around him settled, he found himself on a gigantic, floating island. The entire island was desolate, and hovering in the center of the lifeless plot of earth was a colossal magic cage. The cage was several hundred meters tall, wide, and long and covered in all sorts of divine runes, which radiated an ancient, eternal aura. Inside the cage slept a silver infant dragon. Even trapped, the infant dragon's aura was unsuppressed, and as it washed over Shi Feng, he struggled to breathe. What a powerful life rating. It's no wonder why even the various superpowers God-ranked experts in the past were no match for Tier 5 divine dragons in a one-on-one fight. Shi Feng was dumbfounded as he gazed at the infant dragon hovering in the island's center. He had seen plenty of true dragons in his time, but he had never seen a divine dragon before. The ice dragon he had fought in the Cold Spring Canyon was nothing compared to this infant dragon. The differences between them were like that between an ordinary stone and a diamond. Working to contain his excitement, Shi Feng began to look for ways to open the magic cage. Most players hadn't seen a magic cage at this stage of the game and wouldn't know how to open one, but Shi Feng wasn't most players. Magic cages had typically been used during ancient times to imprison criminals while they waited for punishment. The power of time would steadily wear down the prisoner's strength. This was why God's domain had so many epic quests that required players to slay these criminals, finally meting out justice. To end these criminals' long, miserable lives, players would have to release the seal on the prisoner's magic cage. Shi Feng had never opened a magic cage before, but based on what he had learned from others, one first had to locate the core magic arrays, which were located in the outside world. Players could then destroy or decode the arrays to unlock the magic cage. Shi Feng spent the next dozen or so hours searching, during which he found a total of 7 magic arrays around the desolate island. Every one of the arrays was incredibly complex, and that wasn't a result of the level of design. Rather, their complexity was a result of the frightening number of elements to each array. Even as a master magician, Shi Feng felt a headache brew as he examined the magic arrays. Whoever designed these magic arrays is vicious. Did they have any intention of letting the divine dragon free? Every one of these magic arrays uses 7 elements. Without having mastered all 7, no one could open this magic cage. Shi Feng was flabbergasted after examining the core magic arrays. Magic arrays used mana as their foundations, and normally, a master magic array would, at most, rely on the 4 major elements' power. Ordinary people couldn't control the remaining 3 supreme elements: illusion, space, and time. Not even the elven race, beloved by the elements, could accomplish the feat to decode the core magic arrays. Players would need to have mastered all 7 elements. Without that master, they simply wouldn't have the power to decode them. However, players normally only encountered the 3 supreme elements after reaching Tier 5, and that would only be a brush of contact. Decoding these magic arrays is impossible. It seems destroying them is my only choice. Giving the matter some thought, Shi Feng realized that destruction was his only option. The core magic arrays might look very powerful, but they didn't have any significant defensive mechanisms. As long as he could deal more damage than the arrays could tolerate, he should be able to destroy the magic arrays. Shi Feng then retrieved the Crimson Dragon flying ship and attacked one of the arrays with the ship's magic elven cannon. Boom! The beam struck the core magic array, and the entire island shook with the impact. As the dust settled, Shi Feng noticed that the array's glow had dimmed slightly. Yes! It's working! Shi Feng's excitement spiked when he saw the results of his attack. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The blast hadn't exceeded the magic array's tolerance, but it had exhausted a significant fraction of the array's energy reserves. If he could deplete the magic array's energy to a certain level, the array wouldn't be able to endure the magic elven cannon's attacks and crumble. For a time, Shi Feng bombarded the core magic arrays, firing the moment the magic elven cannon's cooldown came to an end. He didn't mind the magic crystals he had to spend to do it, he still had plenty on him. Time passed quickly. Finally, after a full day of assaulting the magic arrays and expending nearly all of the magic crystals in his bag, Shi Feng destroyed the 7th core magic array. As the 7th core magic array crumbled, the magic cage shattered. Chapter 2473, Dragon's Contractor finally, success. Shi Feng breathed a sigh of relief once the magic cage in the center of the island broke. He had somewhat underestimated the core magic arrays. Even with the magic elven cannon's power, it had taken over a full day's assault and nearly all of his magic crystals to destroy all 7 arrays. These magic arrays were even tougher Zero-Wing City's defensive magic array. The instant the magic cage shattered, the slumbering silver divine dragon opened its eyes and released a deafening roar, which echoed across the entire island, making the ground tremble. The infant dragon spread its wings, flapping them and creating a powerful storm that blew away the remains of its confinement. The storm's mighty winds even made Shi Feng stumble back from over 500 yards away. Is this the power of a true divine dragon? An indescribable astonishment filled Shi Feng as he gazed at the 50-meter-tall silver divine dragon. Silver divine dragon, Auerbeck, dragon, mythic, level. HP. / He couldn't discern the divine dragon's level, but its statistics revealed that it was a bona fide Tier 4 mythic. Despite the fact that it was only a mythic monster, the silver divine dragon felt as if it had absolute dominance over the world around it. Even the high magic elf, Ulunium, was a weakling next to this silver divine dragon. Shi Feng had been able to resist, albeit slightly, Ulunium's power, but standing before Auerbeck, he couldn't even consider resisting. Movement was immensely difficult in Auerbeck's presence, much less fighting. If this infant dragon willed it, it could slay him with a thought, and he wouldn't even get the chance to summon a Tier 4 hero. Now free of its magic cage, Auerbeck landed before Shi Feng and asked, "Little human, are you responsible for releasing me from my cage?" Auerbeck's tone was mild and calm, but he radiated an insane pressure. When Shi Feng heard the divine dragon's question, he felt as if the heavens themselves were demanding an answer, and there was no room for lies. "Yes, Lord Divine Dragon. I destroyed the magic cage's core magic arrays and freed you," Shi Feng replied, his tone neither too humble, nor too arrogant as he suppressed his building anxiety. Dragons were inherently prideful creatures. After all, they stood at the peak of God's domain and viewed lesser creatures with little to no importance. However, dragons were a race that also respected strength. If one proved themselves, they could earn dragons' recognition. Divine dragons were no exception to this. If he groveled before the silver divine dragon, Auerbach would look down on him, and his reward might be even less than if he had performed badly. You have truly surprised me. I had never expected such a tiny being to destroy a cage set by a goddess, Auerbach said, surprise and curiosity flashing in his eyes as he watched Shi Feng. He looked at Shi Feng as if he had just seen an ant flip an elephant. However, in my divine eyes, you are telling the truth. According to the ancient agreement, I will engage in a contract with you to serve as your companion since you have rescued me, but I am a divine dragon. A weakling will not qualify to stand beside me. First, you must pass my test. If you do, I will acknowledge you. You have 4 months to prove yourself. I will remain by your side during this time and fight with you. Of course, if you fail my test, our contract will be dissolved. Over the next 4 months, I will give you 3 chances to challenge my test. If you fail all 3, our contract will be dissolved. System, congratulations. You have rescued the divine dragon, Auerbach, and completed the first phase of the epic quest, Void Cage. Rewarding 10 legacy skill points. You have become a divine dragon's contractor. System, you have triggered the second phase of the epic quest, Void Cage. Quest content, complete Auerbach's test within 4 natural months. Rewards unknown. Sure enough, obtaining a divine dragon won't be so easy. The notifications didn't particularly surprise Shi Feng. I'll have to try and grow as strong as possible in the next 4 months. The various superpowers had sacrificed much to summon a Tier 5 creature with their summoning towers in the past. Some had even been required to kill Tier 5 NPCs to retain their summoned creatures and establish them as their fortress's true guardians. Although Auerbach was only a Tier 4 mythic, not even ordinary Tier 5 monsters would be a match for the divine dragon. It would be odd if no trial existed to retain control over such a creature. Fortunately, as far as Shi Feng was concerned, 4 months would be more than enough time for Shi Feng to prove himself a strong enough companion for Auerbach. As long as he could fully unlock his epic mana body and obtain the 3 last fragments of Solomon's sword, passing Auerbach's test shouldn't be a problem. The moment Auerbach finished his explanation, the divine dragon began to chant an incantation. A 4-fold magic array appeared around Shi Feng, rapidly shrinking until it transformed into a silver rune. The rune then imprinted itself on Shi Feng's arm before fading away. Shi Feng then received another system notification. System, you have obtained the Contractor's mark and become the divine dragon, Auerbach's contractor. System, the Fortress Lord's token has discovered the Contractor's mark. Do you wish to let the divine dragon Auerbach serve the Starlight Fortress's guardian? Shi Feng agreed without a second thought, and once he did, a new tab, Contracted Companions, appeared in his system interface. He clicked on the tab and discovered Auerbach's statistics, which contained new information. Silver Divine Dragon, Auerbach, Dragon, Mythic, Level 111 HP 10, 900 000/10, 900 000/000 crap. Isn't his HP a little too high? Shi Feng nearly cursed aloud when he saw Auerbach's statistics. He had thought the Starlight Behemoth's 4 billion HP had been a little much for a level 113 mythic monster. If players wanted to kill such a boss with conventional methods, they'd need a 1,000-man team of Tier 3 players. Unless a team could deal -8 million damage per second, they'd never overcome the Realm Lord's battle recovery, much less kill it. With the Starlight Behemoth's horrific defense, ordinary Tier 3 experts would barely deal -10,000 damage with their attacks. Auerbach, however, was even more frightening. The Divine Dragon was only level 111, yet it had nearly 3 times as much HP as the Starlight Behemoth. Its battle recovery alone would regenerate 109 million HP every 5 seconds, and a Divine Dragon should have at least twice as high defense as the Realm Lord. Staring at Auerbach's statistics, Shi Feng doubted that even Tier 4 players could kill it, not to mention new Tier 3 players. While Shi Feng was shocked over Auerbach's astonishing attributes, the island under his feet began to tremble and fall apart. Now that the magic cage is gone, this island won't hold for much longer. "We need to leave quickly," Auerbach warned his new human companion. The infant dragon began to chant another incantation, and in the blink of an eye, Shi Feng vanished and reappeared on Auerbach's back. The silver divine dragon then spread his wings and, with a flap, transformed into a streak of light, flying toward the spatial tear the summoning tower had opened and leaving the void land. Meanwhile, Divine Tribe's members were hard at work repairing the Starlight Fortress's infrastructure. They'd also begun constructing hotels and shops. To better manage the fortress, Divine Tribe had sent over 100 Tier 3 personal guards to garrison the fortress, all of which were tasked with patrolling the streets and protecting the fortress's various establishments. While Phythalia and the other Divine Tribe upper echelons planned the patrol routes for the personal guards, something odd happened to the summoning tower in the south end of the fortress. Divine runes began to appear around the lightless tower, illuminating the structure with a dazzling glow. Suddenly, an intense aura washed over the Starlight Fortress, and every player within felt stifled, struggling to move. Where is this aura coming from? What is going on over there? Did we miss a guardian boss? Everyone turned toward the brilliantly lit summoning tower, growing anxious. Even Phythalia and the guild's other upper echelons, who met in their temporary residence, wore grim expressions. None of the guardian bosses they had faced had such a powerful aura, yet Divine Tribe's team had still relied on a Tier 4 hero summoning scroll to defeat them. Even then, the Silver Lion Legion had suffered significant losses. Now that the Tier 4 hero they had summoned had gone, they didn't have a Tier 4 combatant in the fortress. If another guardian boss had truly appeared, the consequences would be dire. They had already invested a considerable amount of resources into repairing a portion of the Starlight Fortress. If they had to fight in another huge battle, everything they had worked for would crumble, even before the various superpowers experts arrived. Quick, look! Something's above the summoning tower. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Ew, isn't that a spatial tear? Why is there a spatial tear over the tower? The fortress's players recognized the dark tear for what it was immediately, and as it grew, they were overcome with curiosity and confusion. Suddenly, a streak of light flew from the spatial tear, and a figure appeared before them all. As they got a clearer look, what they saw rendered them all dumbfounded. A dragon? Chapter 2474, Fortress Startled, Why Has a Dragon Appeared? Phythalia's expression darkened when she saw the divine dragon, which was over 100 meters long, in the sky. She had seen a dragon personally during a quest and was certain that it was a disastrous creature. Neither players nor NPCs, not even NPC cities, could stand before a dragon's might. She had watched a dark dragon destroy an empire's border city and annihilate any reinforcements the empire had sent. Players like her had only been able to watch as the dark dragon destroyed the NPC city and the Tier 4 NPC-led army. If the war god's temple in the empire hadn't sent its forces in time and eventually defeated the dark dragon, the creature would have even slaughtered the nearby players. Other than Phythalia, every Divine Tribe member in the Starlight Fortress panicked. Most of them had never seen the horror dragons could wreak, but they could all tell how terrifying the creatures were after seeing Auerbach's statistics. Auerbach's level of 111 wasn't anything special, but how did it have 10 billion HP? With the incredible defense of dragons, they would never overcome Auerbach's battle recovery, even if Auerbach stood there and allowed the tens of thousands of players in the fortress to attack. Compared to Auerbach's insane HP, the pressure the dragon radiated was nearly fatal to Divine Tribe's members. They were all experts, with hundreds of tough battles under their belts, yet they felt as if they were filled with lead as they bathed in Auerbach's dragon might. In this state, they'd be fortunate if they could muster the strength to flee, much less fight. Why is this happening? McCaffrey despaired as he watched the divine dragon soar above the Starlight Fortress. Like Phythalia, he had witnessed the power dragons wielded. Current players had practically no hope of defeating such a creature. Even if they still had their Tier 4 hero, they wouldn't stand a chance against this dragon. Still, Divine Tribe had gone to great lengths to secure its temporary residence in the Starlight Fortress, investing tons of manpower and resources to develop it. The loss of abandoning the fortress would be extraordinary. We don't have a choice. McCaffrey, notify all Tier 3 players and tell them to prepare for battle. I'll try to attract the dragon's attention while you get everyone out of the fortress. Once we convene, we'll try to lure it away, Phythalia said, taking in a deep breath as she prepared herself for a final struggle. They knew they were no match for the dragon, but if Auerbach wasn't here to capture the Starlight Fortress, they only needed to lure the creature away to save it. Isn't the price of this plan a little too high, Commander Phythalia? McCaffrey paled a bit when he heard the command. Phythalia wanted to lure the dragon out of the fortress, but even ordinary players would realize that Auerbach could likely kill Tier 3 players with a single hit. His commander intended to use their players 1W Tier 3 experts as bait. The various superpowers Tier 3 experts were desperately grinding to level up. If they sacrificed so many of their guild's Tier 3 experts now, Divine Tribe would find itself at a disadvantage when it competed with the various superpowers later. This is our only option, Phythalia said. If we don't lure the dragon out of the fortress, everything we've invested thus far will go to waste. As long as we can draw the dragon out, we can recoup our losses with the Starlight Fortress's conveniences. I understand. Gritting his teeth, McCaffrey began to contact the Tier 3 players in the fortress. As Phythalia had said, the levels they'd have to sacrifice to lure Auerbach away would be nothing as long as they secured their hold on the Starlight Fortress. The fortress offered massive advantages, after all. Suddenly, Crimson Witch interrupted, pointing at the Divine Dragon in astonishment. Commander Phythalia, it looks like there's a player on the dragon's back. A player? How is that possible? For a moment, Phythalia assumed Crimson Witch was hallucinating. They were talking about a Tier 4 dragon. Even if it were only an infant dragon, it still wouldn't degrade itself by serving as a mount, not even for Tier 4 or 5 NPCs. In God's domain, there were individuals known as Dragon Knights that could ride dragons after capturing and nurturing a Tier 3 newborn dragon. These Dragon Knights stood at the very apex of God's domain, and they even demanded respect from emperors. But riding a dragon was nothing but a dream with players' current strength. And yet, as soon as Phythalia finished her question and turned toward the Divine Dragon, the sight stunned her. She could actually see someone standing on Auerbach's back. Although she couldn't tell who it was due to the bright light emitting from the Divine Dragon, she could spot the green diamond marker, which only players possessed, hovering above the figure's head when she squinted. Before she could recover from her daze, however, Auerbach began to descend. As the Divine Dragon approached the ground, the green diamond marker became clearer. It wasn't long before many of the other Tier 3 experts in the fortress noticed it, as well. How is that possible? A player can actually ride a dragon? Who is that? Surprise and confusion overwhelmed everyone as they stared at the figure on Auerbach's back. Commander Phythalia, it's coming toward us, Crimson Witch exclaimed when she realized that Auerbach was flying in their direction. When Auerbach had first appeared, the Divine Dragon had been too far away for her to notice anything peculiar. Fortunately, unlike Tier 2 players, she could, more or less, resist Auerbach's dragon might, but as the Divine Dragon approached, the pressure she felt grew stronger. Now, even breathing became a challenge. Hopefully, the dragon rider isn't an enemy. Everyone, prepare your instantaneous movement scrolls. If you notice even a hint of aggression, flee. Every life we can save matters. Phythalia reminded her comrades in a grim tone. If they had merely faced a wild dragon, they would, at worst, lose the Starlight Fortress, abandoning it and allowing the creature to destroy it. If the Divine Dragon were under a player's control, however, they had a much bigger problem. If that player wanted to, they could command their dragon to massacre every Divine Tribe member in the area. All of the guild members in the fortress were Divine Tribe's experts, including the guild's 2 trump card legions. If they were annihilated, the consequences would be unimaginably dire. Everyone around Phythalia did as they were told, pulling instantaneous movement scrolls from their bags. Crimson Witch and the guild's other upper echelons all retrieved Tier 3 instantaneous movement scrolls, trump cards the guild had prepared for them as a protective measure. These scrolls were incredibly rare, only obtainable by luck. While Divine Tribe's members in the temporary residence prepared to flee, Auerbach arrived above the building. The Divine Dragon's speed caught everyone off guard. Crimson Witch and the others were racked with hopelessness, realizing that they couldn't actually activate the scrolls in their hands. Worse, the instantaneous movement scrolls weren't the only thing that had abandoned them. They felt as if space itself had left them to die, siding with the Divine Dragon hovering above them. Spatial imprisonment? How is this happening? Astonished, Phythalia could do nothing but stare at the Divine Dragon as it began to land. Spatial imprisonment was a move only the strongest Tier 4 NPCs could use. No monster should be capable of mastering the skill. Yet, this dragon had a naturally occurring domain that included the spatial imprisonment's effects. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU now, they had no hope of escape. This stranger held their lives in his hands. As Phythalia and her comrades' anguish reached its peak, a familiar voice reached their ears. I was hoping to find you. I'm glad you're all here. As the dragon's rider spoke, he jumped down from Auerbach's back. Seeing the player up close, everyone was stupefied. Guild leader Black Flame? Chapter 2475. All sides shaken when they realized that the figure riding Auerbach had been Shi Feng. Silence fell in Divine Tribe's temporary residence as everyone stared at the swordsman. McCaffrey and Crimson Witch, in particular, watched Shi Feng walk toward them with dropped jaws. They both felt as if they were looking at a monster with limitless strength. Whenever they thought that they had seen the depths of Shi Feng's, they soon learned that all they had seen was a fraction. Shi Feng's Crimson Dragon flying ship, for example, and the domain tools he had used to suppress the Starlight Behemoth and strengthen the Silver Lion Legion, the various superpowers coveted these items, yet they couldn't get their hands on them. Shi Feng, on the other hand, had them all. Moreover, Shi Feng had successfully captured the Starlight Fortress, a feat none of the various superpowers could accomplish at this stage of the game. And now, Shi Feng even had a dragon. Dragons were creatures of ultimate destruction in God's domain. Even the various NPC kingdoms and empires got headaches whenever one showed up, and yet, Shi Feng had one under his control. Even if Auerbach were only a Tier 4 infant dragon, it would be more than enough to deter the various superpowers from attacking the Starlight Fortress. So, this is why he's so confident. Realization dawned on Phythalia when she glanced at the Divine Dragon standing silently behind Shi Feng. She now had an inkling of why Shi Feng had rejected her proposal after learning that the Western continent's superpowers might band together to target his fortress. With Auerbach here, the superpowers experts would have to be suicidal to cause a ruckus in the Starlight Fortress. They wouldn't even have the chance to escape if Auerbach set his sights on them. Shortly after Shi Feng had arrived at Divine Tribe's temporary residence with Auerbach, some of the various superpowers spies reported the situation to their superiors. Impossible. You're talking about a dragon. How can a player possibly control such a powerful monster? When the various superpowers' upper echelons read the reports, they assumed their subordinates had turned traitorous, trying to trick them with false information to prevent them from assaulting the Starlight Fortress. However, as these upper echelons continued to receive similar reports from other spies in Divine Tribe, they couldn't deny the truth. There was no way all of their spies had turned against them at once. To gain more information and a better understanding of the situation in the Starlight Fortress, they had secretly paid a huge price to turn some of Divine Tribe's members in the fortress to their side. Naturally, they had ensured that none of the bribed players knew about each other to prevent these players from collaborating to provide false information for Divine Tribe's benefit. Although the reports were unbelievable, it was undeniable after receiving reports from over a dozen spies. Once they had verified the information, a commotion swept through the various superpowers. Some of the superpowers that had planned to assault the fortress began to hesitate. They carefully considered whether or not they should oppose Shi Feng and the Divine Tribe with the rest of the superpowers. Before the dragon had appeared, they had been 90% sure that they could take the Starlight Fortress. Even if they failed, they'd ensure that no one could use the fortress, even if Divine Tribe sent all of its experts to protect it. However, the situation had changed. If they tried to take the fortress with a Tier 4 Dragon Guard, they'd suffer severe losses. Players didn't have a snowflake's chance in hell of defeating a Tier 4 dragon, which was a fact the various superpowers had long since verified. Since God's Domain's launch, dragons had been responsible for the destruction of many NPC border cities. The Western continent proved to be far more dangerous than the East. Of course, if they gave up on this operation, they'd have a very difficult time finding another opportunity to move against the Starlight Fortress. The fortress had only recently been captured, and even if Divine Tribe had invested a ton of manpower and resources in its repairs, the guild couldn't fully repair the fortress in 3 short days. The Starlight Fortress was at its weakest right now. If they did not assault the Starlight Fortress now, taking it would only become more challenging as time passed. While the various superpowers considered their next move, a 300-man team attacked a demonic creature army camp in a level 100 neutral map not far from Star Valley. Not only did this campsite house over 6,000 demonic creatures, but every one was level 110. These demonic creatures were even led by a level 112, mythic ranked 8-eyed Scorpion King. Despite such a powerful force, however, the 300-man team held an overwhelming advantage in the battle. They even overwhelmed the Scorpion King, not to mention the level 110 Grand Lords. The army's boss couldn't manage to deal any significant damage, while the 300-man team continued to chip away at its HP. The team hadn't suffered a single casualty, even by the time the Scorpion King fell. In contrast, demonic creature corpses littered the ground. We really got lucky this time. Not only did we find a demonic creature campsite, but the Scorpion King also dropped a level 100+ epic battle axe. Thunder, this axe should go to you, a thin man in pitch-black armor said as he handed the battle axe to another man, who stood nearly 3 meters tall and was covered in runes. If McCaffrey had seen this, he would have been astonished. This team was the Hell Legion, the Netherworld Empire's strongest trump card legion. Every member was a Tier 3 player, and they all had the combat standards to rival Grand Lords of the same level. The thin man, shrouded in a dense, lethal aura, felt as powerful as a mythic monster. Commander, we've just received a report from the higher-ups. They claim that a Tier 4 infant dragon is guarding the Starlight Fortress, and because of this, many superpowers have abandoned the notion of assaulting the fortress. Our superiors are warning us to be careful, a Tier 3, black-clad assassin suddenly informed the thin man. An infant dragon? The man's lips curled into a smile. How interesting. It's no wonder why they captured the Starlight Fortress, disregarding the consequences, but if they think that can stop us, they're mistaken. Other superpowers might be afraid of the dragon that protected the Starlight Fortress, but the Hell Legion was not. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The reason was very simple. There was only one dragon in the fortress, while the Hell Legion had 300 players. If the Hell Legion went on a rampage inside the fortress, they could slay hundreds or thousands of players before the dragon would reach them. They'd also be able to escape the dragon's pursuit. They weren't concerned that they couldn't take down the Starlight Fortress in the least. Commander, I've received another important message. You've received a request to negotiate with Fithalia, the black-clad assassin added. Fithalia? The thin man smiled when he heard the name. Since an old friend has so graciously invited me, I must show her the proper respect. Pack up, everyone. We're heading to the Starlight Fortress. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.